So is it time for the definitive all dungeons ranked tier list? 100% truth, no opinions.
Real and true.
Yeah, and we'll have chat opinion on it too.
Chat's opinion? Oh shit! Can we really trust chat?
Input. We're not gonna take what they say because they're stupid and dumb.
Yeah, you
But
gotta be careful about
we
listening to chat.
We can take input.
I'm gonna need your guys' help because I didn't play very much Legion. I played only the Legion time walking. I don't know if that's the same experience.
Absolutely not.
I mean, this is a big deal. This is a lot of dungeons, right? So
this is a lot of dungeons.
Yeah.
Really carefully about where we place a lot of these picks.
So how do we? What are our like? What is S tier? What is A tier? You want to do it in Discord? It's just on my stream.
So yeah, Discord.
Discord.
So we should do it like this. S tier will be dungeons you would be fine with having every season. Like
okay, infinite replayability
season, but like I'd be okay with having it every single season.
Okay.
It should be like it's really good, but I don't necessarily want it every season.
You enjoy it while it's there, but it's not like the perfect dungeon. It's got some problems.
Yeah. B should be like, it's okay. I don't hate the dungeon.
I wouldn't be upset with it being there.
Yeah. C should be, I don't really like this dungeon. It's got more flaws than positives. Then D is straight up trash. It's basically Spires.
D is Spires.
It's got little to no redeeming factor. Let's just
like Dorki's right voice is turning into a robot.
It's
you too. Yeah, change the server. How do you change it?
Change the server? How do you change it?
Man.
You can't change it anymore. What the fuck?
Wait, what is report rate?
Fine, right? I don't know.
Seems like it works. Alright, so we're not gonna spoil what tier Spires goes in. We'll start alphabetically. This is gonna be a good benchmark dungeon. The first dungeon is Atal'Dazar.
Well, I think we should first,
or should we go by expansions?
Let's just go in order. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
we should first ask what everyone thinks is fun about Atal'Dazar. Like everyone just spit out one thing in chat that's fun about Atal'Dazar, and then we just like look at everything and like
chat. Put the tier and then put why. Give like a short reason why.
Just say what's fun. You don't have to say what's bad. Just say whatever is fun.
Oh, okay.
You can say like Big Pull is fun. Vocal is fun. Whatever you want to say.
Everyone is saying snapping. Is snapping fun?
I don't know if it was necessarily fun, but it was definitely like unique to the dungeon, right? There was so much of it that, like, if you think about any dungeon where snapping occurs, Atal'Dazar is probably the first place that comes to mind.
Yeah, if snapping wasn't a thing, the dungeon would definitely suck way more. But I do think they would have made the dungeon a little bit different. Like mostly the swords, right? Because like there's no.
The dungeon definitely would have gotten nerfed if it wasn't for snapping.
Yeah.
Because the swords were completely broken.
We'll just count it with the snapping. I think so. I think the strongest thing by far is routing. That dungeon has the most amount of routes done differently since beginning to the end. Like I remember we used to start going straight into Razan, and then sometimes you would go left in Lust. Then later on, people would do right in Lust. Then later on, people would snap middle in Lust. There were just like so many different ways you can start and play that dungeon. I think that's the first strong point. The second strong point is it's a really short dungeon. It's 30 minutes long. I think almost every boss was fun in its own way. Priestess was pretty short. First boss, Razan, was like just a tank buster. Wasn't anything too crazy, sort of like Tree and Waycrest. Vocal was pretty interesting. It was like a little bit fun. It was like a rot fight.
It was a healer boss.
I think last fight was pretty good too. Me, it's an A.
Damn, you covered all the positives. What the fuck? Didn't leave anything left for us.
All right, well, I'm the healer, so I'll go over the negatives.
Okay.
I think snapping was not super great. Like, I think the fact that the only reason the dungeon was doable was because of snapping and a lot of stuff was super OP.
But I mean,
Also,
we
I
can't
feel
really
like
count that because like it would have been nerfed, right? So we just have to count as if it was part of it.
I guess. I feel
Like,
I don't
unless
know.
you
I
were
feel like
really
that
opposed to snapping.
gameplay was like not. It was okay, but it wasn't my favorite. Like as a coordinated group, it was good, but I feel like what do you do as like a normal group or whatever, and like then like the tank falls off or like I don't know. There's so much. I don't think it could be S tier, but I do agree on all points that there's a lot of different. There's like a lot of variety of pulls. There's some pulls that are hard for healers, some hard for tanks, like bosses that are hard for healers. Like I think it had a good variety of stuff. I feel like I don't know. I think I didn't appreciate Atal'Dazar as much as I should have, and I don't think there's really that many super negative points, other than the fact that there were some mobs that were like really really bad to pull that were kind of hard to get around, and I think season 4 made that easier.
I would argue season 4 made it harder, if anything, because you had to fight around it, right? Like there were
Sort of. I mean, you just mass rooted the guys on the right, and then like you could skip past all the Goliath guys pretty easily on the left.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for me, the main like detractor for this dungeon was the fact that the boss design was cool, but then the bosses just kind of killed themselves. Like
that's only Priestess.
no. Volcall did damage to him too.
Yeah, Volcall did
only in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like at the very end, they nerfed the shit out of it.
I guess they nerfed the shit out of it. But
yeah,
but
like,
also
you just have to do the fight normally.
I also disliked how the last boss was just so literal pass fail. Like at any point in that boss, if one person accidentally trips on a spider, it's just 100 to 0. You don't live
instantly dead, and they would like run
I
around
don't
and
mind
get
that
trapped.
though. I thought the last boss was really good. It was like an engaging boss fight the entire time.
Okay, I mean I do agree with you guys. I think it's an A dungeon, not an S, not a B.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's stopping it from being S is if they did a little bit more tuning passes. Like the reanimate on guards were way too problematic.
Yeah,
I think it was also like sort of rough on pugs. But aside from that, like I think it's like one step below S. That's how I see it. It's just way too strong.
The other thing that would make it S is just like there was a lot of quote unquote routing you could do in terms of order, but like so much of the dungeon was off limits, and really routing just meant what order you did. Very rarely did you do extra pulls. Like sometimes
on the
you would
stage.
do.
That's not true though, because like you know how like we started doing the trolls, or sometimes we start going into middle. I think the only thing that was off limits was on the stuff on the right.
We did some nonsense stuff, but I don't think like there. Basically, the question was just: did you kill the middle, or did you find other stuff to do? That was pretty much like the only question.
Yeah,
because you basically did every single sword pack. You had to do all the stuff by Alunza. You always did the pack on the left. You always did the pack on the right, like from the start. And then it's like, do you go further into one of those, or do you kill the stuff in the middle? That was like basically the whole route, right?
But I think that's what's good, like being able to choose where you want to.
Yeah, I mean, no, I'm not saying it's not bad. I'm just saying like it's not.
Yeah, it's definitely not
routing.
perfect. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's like all the way up there.
Ooh, seeing the entire dungeon when you enter is Pog. I do kind of agree with that. I think the first beginning of the dungeon is kind of important. And like Atal'Dazar, you always do like a pretty big pull in Lust, and like it looks cool. Like I definitely think we didn't talk about that, but aesthetically it's pretty cool too.
He is the best A can be.
All right, A for Atal'Dazar. All right, this is one I can contribute 0 for. The Arcway.
Nice. Just know it's the longest dungeon in the game, right next to one other dungeon.
Yeah, it's tied with Halls of Valor for the longest timer in the game, 45 minutes long. It has 5 bosses.
What does the chat think? Well, make sure chat.
It's all about what you guys.
Well, you guys can keep talking. I'm just reminding chat.
Yeah.
I'm reminding
Say
chat.
one thing that's fun about Arcway.
Give your positives.
Doesn't matter if you guys say D.
Rank.
Yeah, if you guys are D'ing it, just say one thing that's fun anyways. Like surely there's something fun in there.
Yo, Minigamer, thanks for the 2-year resub. I appreciate it.
I will say that as a Warlock player, I did enjoy this dungeon. Growl, one of the main factors in this dungeon was Warlocks could control Demon, one of the mobs in this dungeon, and it'd give a giant haste and damage buff to somebody every 30 seconds. It was kind of nice. Problem was you kind of needed a Warlock to time high keys because of that. So maybe that could be a detractor. Like the bosses were all pretty interesting as far as Legion dungeons go. I mean, the main detractor is just it's so long. And I guess it's a cramped hallway dungeon too.
Seems not very liked by the chat.
Yeah, so
I'm
I'm
not
gonna
seeing
add to the
anything
fun
about B.
parts. I would say the fun parts are the bosses. I think the bosses are almost all pretty well designed. Like I think the spider boss was really cool and is fun. I think the haste boss, the robot, that was really cool, especially as a DPS because you would just like pop off really hard. Last boss was like sort of interesting. That one, what was that boss? It was like the Dreadlord dude, whatever you call him.
On the far left
The
side.
Felguard. Yeah, the Felguard. That guy, that was the only shitty boss.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. I can't really think of much else positives. I guess sort of routing technically, because there were so many different ways you can play that dungeon. But it was also RNG. It had the door mechanic. You can either choose to go left, or you RNG the door on the left or the right.
Yeah, it was the precursor to Waycrest, right?
Yeah. I think overall it's a weak dungeon, but there were a couple of fun parts. So I wouldn't put in a D, but I think it's a C.
I think it's low B, high C in that area. Like it was a fine dungeon for its time, but it's definitely been outshined by new expansion dungeons a decent bit.
Yeah, if they split it into 2 dungeons, I think this would be a decently strong dungeon. But like I said, like the only way it's a D is if it's absolutely trash and there's nothing good about it, nothing redeeming. But there are some redeeming factors to it. It's not complete trash.
There was more RNG to it as well. If you remember the on the last boss, there was like the RP phase when you hit 50%, he'd teleport you away from him, and there were he would teleport you to one of the boss rooms. And depending on which boss room you got, it could be really slow or really fast. You could save like 30 seconds.
Oh, that was that dungeon. Okay, I remember watching this. I think I remember that. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, let's go with C.
Well, I mean,
this sounds like a C.
Yeah, I'm fine with a C, like a low C. Not the worst dungeon.
All right. Well, not well liked by you guys, not well liked by chat, but not the worst dungeon in the world. Okay, next a dungeon I got to play in Time Walking, but I basically don't know anything about. Black Rook Hold. All I know is about the archers. I just hear about the archers.
Dude, the archers in this dungeon literally made it so that if you weren't a Windwalker monk, and even if you were a Windwalker monk, this dungeon was completely unplayable. In between the first and second boss, there are like 3 trash packs that have archer mobs that cast an ability called Shoot, which goes on targets within 35 yards. So range can, of course, stand max range and just do full DPS. But if a melee got hit by 2 of them on like a 26, it would just kill you from 100 to 0. And I think if you went up to like 28 fortified, it would just straight up one-shot you. So it was just unplayable for melee characters.
It was also very narrow corridors almost the entire time. This was a very bad Sanguine dungeon.
Ooh, and Sanguine was 1 minute back then too. I feel like chat does not like narrow dungeons.
Also, bosses are very overtuned in this dungeon. They were mostly pretty boring. I think the strongest part about this dungeon is massive pulls. This dungeon had a lot of really hefty size pulls. Like all the stuff in the stairways, all the stuff, like all those little fire breathing guys. First boss was kind of cool, I guess.
This did give us one of the best moments in the MDI I think I've ever seen. I'm trying to find the clip right now, but I can't find it. But during the MDI, this was back when Rich Campbell was casting the MDI. One of the teams just had people get run over by the boulders on the staircase like multiple times. And he just broke out laughing on stream. It was just so funny, but I can't find the clip.
Rich?
Yeah, Rich.
That actually owns.
Yeah, he was just casting the dungeon, just started laughing.
Like, yeah, I respect that. I've been known to laugh in some of my casts. Okay, well, you guys
I think it's a weak dungeon.
Yeah, you guys don't seem too optimistic about it, but it doesn't sound like it's a D.
Yeah, it's not necessarily. It had a lot of big pulls that made it fun, but I don't think it would be playable nowadays.
I actually liked the bosses a lot. The bosses in this dungeon were actually really good.
Which ones?
All of them. I actually liked all of the bosses.
Really? Dude, the last one was so boring, and it was just like a one shot. Just live the one shot. You did the fight.
Last one maybe not so much. Smash Fight was good.
Yeah. I think Smash Fight would have been good if it wasn't so overtuned. Because I mean, the puddles also never went away, right? That was like a very bad part about it. Like you didn't feel like you could really strategically play too much. Like you sort of just place it all on one side and just like move along.
There was a little bit of a skill cap on the second boss as well. You had to know the timing to when to move for like the flame charge.
Yeah.
You could take 0 damage from that if you knew how to time it properly every time.
That's true. Yeah, that boss is kind of cool. I think to me it's a C.
It's probably a C though.
Arcway. Yeah, I think it just has too many problems, but it still has some redeeming factors.
Do we rank in intermediate tiers? Do we put it before or after Arcway, or we just have it as a C and not worry about it?
You can put it ahead, I guess. I don't know.
Let's put it ahead. Yeah, it's better than Arcway.
It was also a really long dungeon. It was like 39 minutes or something. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was a long one.
Jeez. Okay, next dungeon. Another dungeon that I've never played. Cohen, Cathedral of Eternal Night.
Ooh. I think this has a lot of fun factors.
What does the chat think about Cohen? Everyone's saying D and F.
I'm very biased. I like this dungeon a lot. This was my team's best dungeon in the MDI when we played. So I have very fond memories of this dungeon. I'm going to be biased.
This one is divisive.
There were the fun parts were massive pulls. It had a lot of massive pulls. It also had so many different ways you can play the dungeon because there was a ton of trash. Like this dungeon had a ton of this dungeon. One of the strategies later on is you would literally skip the entire front section. Like you would have the healer go straight to the top upstairs and die, and like you put a pylon down that would res you. It was like a B-res basically, and you would just death skip the entire front. But like the only way you would be able to do that is if this one part in the gauntlet, there are a bunch of these mobs that run away. Like this is the dumbest part of the entire dungeon. There are a bunch of mobs that run away. And they give like what 30% count, I think.
Around that, if you killed everything, it was about 35%, if I remember properly.
Yeah, so like if you were able to kill them, you would get a crap ton of count for free. If you didn't kill them, though, you would have to do all the rest of the dungeon.
Wait, so they would leave the dungeon?
Yeah, you would you would have to.
So
they
like
like run really fast
or something for count.
Yeah, it's like it's like a loot goblin in Lost Ark.
Sick, actually.
Yeah, there were a bunch of loot goblins. Like literally, they look like loot goblins too. Run, and you had to like Ring of Peace, Ursul's Typhoon AoE stuns, and like kill them before they run away.
Yeah, this was actually the pull that made us figure out that Ring of Peace had a bounce cap. Because there are like 20 imps, and if they each bounce like 3 or 4 times, the Ring of Peace just despawns.
It had a lot of fun parts though. I think the bosses were all pretty cool too. I'm trying to think. Tree boss was like alright. It was like a healer tank check. It just got like exponentially harder. What was the second boss? Second boss was kind of boring.
It was a Thrash
guy.
It's like Thrash Spite. It's literally Smash Spite's little brother. You charge him into bookcases. It wasn't particularly challenging. There was a hard cap though. Like if you ran out of bookcases, the next charge would just kill somebody unless you had like a bop or an immunity.
Yeah, I think last 2 bosses were pretty good too. They were like decently challenging for everyone. It's got like a lot going on. I think it's like a B.
I think it's a B. I think it's fair. No bias B. If I had my choice, I'd put it in A, but I know I'm biased, so B sounds good to me.
It sounds fair. Chat is definitely unsure about this one, but it does sound like it has more redeeming qualities than not. Also, you guys keep saying that the bosses are cool. Do you think boss design in Legion was just straight up better than it was in expansions?
Yeah, especially compared to Shadowlands.
I think it's crazy because it seems like, from at least what I heard, Legion bosses were like always giga overtuned and they would just one-shot everybody. That's like, I didn't play Legion.
But you were also overtuned yourself. Yeah, so that's like another thing.
I don't know if tuning works like that.
You know what I mean, right? Like everything is big. It's like America. You do a lot of damage. You heal a lot. You have a lot of HP. The bosses also do a lot of damage. It was just sick.
Back then, you could gear swap in dungeons, right? So if there was a particularly challenging boss, you swap to a Pridas, you'd swap to a full avoidance set, and you'd be able to live through the more dangerous bosses because of that. So you, in a way, you were more powerful back then than you are now.
Yeah, like just imagine doing these bosses where there's like a ton of healing. Like your HP is literally yo-yoing from like 10% to 100, but you're a Resto Druid and your hots are just like giga juicing, and your HP is just like bouncing back and forth. And like every time you press a big CD, like say you're pressing Trank or say you press Flourish, or you don't have Flourish, but there's like something, there's an artifact trait that was like Flourish, and all your hots just go insane and you just start healing like crazy. It was just like really fun to play.
I was watching
Also-
Smock with Beacon of Virtue, just like
Oh, yeah.
plus 1 flash heal, and it just like heals everybody for like 50% of their health.
Yeah, I mean, healers were definitely just like half DPS back then. I mean, it's the same as it is now, right? Like the really good healers are really only that good because their group makes them that good because they take less damage. But it was amplified back then, right? Because they played more for damage because of that. I also want to say that like the design of Trash going from Legion to BFA and of course Shadowlands now is a lot different, right? Because back in Legion, AoE stuns were so much more powerful, and on top of that, you had Blood Elf silences that also
There were
lasted
2
3
times the
seconds.
duration.
Yeah, Leg Sweep was a 5-second AoE stun. So like Trash design didn't really matter too much because if you went into a big pool with cooldowns, you would just kill it in your AoE CC chain most of the time, and then you would like interrupt
Or you just kite it.
afterwards, or
Yeah.
you'd kite it. So Trash wasn't as in depth back then as it is now.
Yeah, a lot of these trash nowadays would be pretty unacceptable. Which means you get into some of these dungeons.
Alright, well, not to derail too much. So the next dungeon, this is a Legion dungeon that I actually played a fair bit because it was in Great Push. Court of Stars. I feel like chat's gonna love Court of Stars. Let's see what does chat think about Court of Stars.
Just say all the fun parts.
Everyone is spamming S and A. Everyone loves the trade skills and the profession stuff. Chat is pogging out about Court of Stars right now.
So, fun parts is the dungeon has a lot of different ways you can play it. I think that's the best way to explain it. I also think it's the only dungeon that has decent RP. Like, you know, the whole thing where you have to figure out who is the imposter or whatever the hell. Yeah, like that's at least engaging RP. It's not like the type of RP like the Angels where you just click on something and you AFK and you're just wasting your time.
Yeah, until you find the right guy, and then you have to wait for him to walk up for 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that'd be like the only shitty part about it. But like, you know, like actually doing the RP was engaging. The boss, I think every single boss was good, especially the second and the last. Like, I think those bosses were top notch. I think it's not my favorite dungeon though, because I think the RP, I think the whole profession thing is really bad. Like, you have RNG professions. Some of the professions were broken as hell. Like, obviously, when we played this in TGP, it was normalized and it was kind of whatever. Like, you remember that orb that would stun all those robots?
Yep.
If you didn't get that, you would have to make up so much count because you would never fight those robots. Like, you know how we just like literally, like when we did it in TGP,
we would pull like 100 of them and just freeze them
we
in
just
the
pull into
spot.
boss and then like we're done with count already.
Yep.
And the trap too. We had the trap too, right? I think. Where you would
I don't
the
think
boss.
you had trap on tournament.
We had the poison that made the boss go low, I think.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's always there. I'm pretty sure.
Oh no, is it? Okay.
Yeah, that one was always there.
Yeah, there was.
But
so
yeah,
much
there was like a
stuff
trap that a blacksmith or a hunter or something else, like a rogue, could open, and it would just one shot one of those mini bosses. Like, you remember the mini bosses that were next to?
I don't think we had the trap.
the
I
second boss,
remember
right?
those guys. Yeah.
Okay, maybe not. Yeah, so
We
like
had the
that would
healer
just be
thing.
instantly be like an entire minute something
Yeah.
save. Yeah, it was just very RNG. So
This feels like a dungeon that was well liked by casuals, but at a high end, they probably. I mean, so what I think about this dungeon is, I think all of the trash, and this might have been only because we did the NG orbs or whatever, but all of the trash was so boring. It felt like almost none of the trash did anything. There was like some guys that blew up and like some guys that had frontals, but I felt like I was literally permanently AFK for all the trash. And all of the bosses were really cool though. And they definitely, like, Court of Stars had 2 bosses where they were like crazy like healer checks that were like the totally missing in Shadowlands. So yeah, I don't know. For me, this is like an average dungeon. Like, it has some good parts, some bad parts, but also I didn't play when it was like RNG professions, so I don't know if that would have made it more fun or less fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what I can expand upon with that. As far as trash goes, back in Legion, this trash was actually some of the worst trash in the game.
Yeah, it was pretty awful trash. I mean, even the mini bosses were really bad. The
Yeah.
eye guy that would just like beam someone down, you would have to line every single time.
You pretty much lined every single time unless it went on your like one of your immune
Tank.
classes or your tank.
Or yeah.
Essentially, because remember the beam makes you do 50% less damage as well, if I remember properly. So you just really never want to get hit by that. The impacts, if you let any of those go off without an AOE stun, they would just kill someone.
Die, yeah.
Well, that was the same in. That was also the same in when we played it.
The Watchful Inquisitor. I mean, you guys know about that guy, right? Ice Storm goes off, one tick,
Yeah,
someone
you're
gets
just
one
dead.
shot.
Oh.
So I mean, that's definitely not very forgiving trash. One of the things that I hated the most about this dungeon, all the profession stuff aside, was that you just could low roll or high roll the position of your guy in the RP at the end of the dungeon, right? Like if he was upstairs, you saved like 30 seconds of walk time.
Yeah, there's just a lot of RNG basically
It
in
was
this
so
dungeon.
bad. I do think that this is probably for me like low A, high B, right on that line. I don't know where I'd put it.
I'm exactly on that too. I'd probably put it in low A. I do think it has a lot of replay value. I just think it has too many problems if you want to
Yeah.
do this dungeon. Like, it just gets really frustrating doing the high key.
Yeah, I think A is fair. I think if we're talking about strictly for like high key pushing competitiveness, but that's not everything a dungeon is, right? And when we add replayability, I feel like Court of Stars is like probably like top in terms of replayability, just because like not only is there different routes, but there's literally like different buffs every time you go in it. I mean, RNG is kind of not good, but I feel like at least, am I wrong in saying that the timer was kind of pretty free? It was just a matter of if you like live stuff, right? Or is that only the case if you get certain engineering things? So even if you don't get all the right items or whatever, you still can probably time the key, right?
But again, like the bosses become extremely hard
that's true,
if you're missing
yeah.
some of the bosses. Like remember that one,
the healer one was
buff?
crazy.
Yeah, that one was insane. Like it would literally heal for.
Yeah, the Starlight Rose Brew. That was that was pretty important to have.
Yeah, if you didn't have it, you were doomed.
All right. A tier, I think, is fair for the people. All right.
I would put it in very low.
I think chat's going to be all over the place on this one. The next one is the first Shadowlands dungeon, The Other Side. What does the chat think about?
What are all the fun parts? I think
let's hear the good parts about The Other Side.
You just stop saying D and stuff. Just say whatever you guys think was good. Like everyone will always have something that they good.
Look at how split chat is. Here's some of the things that I think are good. I think while they're a little bit overtuned, I think in terms of bosses, besides the last boss was a little bit nonsense, I do feel like
the last boss was awful.
Between all three of the other bosses, I think they're actually pretty interesting and like pretty challenging, but they're all fair. Season 1, some of the stuff was a little overtuned, but it mostly got fixed. So I think it's similar to Atal'Dazar in that the bosses are like challenging in different ways and they're all pretty cool. I think the whole Ardenweld area is like really, really well designed and I really, really enjoy that area. The only problem is the visibility. The rest of the dungeon, not my favorite.
Yeah, that pretty much it is. Fun parts are Ardenweald and Hakar and Dealer were good bosses if you knew how to deal with them. Especially Dealer. Dealer was a very, what's the word? I guess like a lot of organization required. Like you always needed to know who was taking the bombs, where you were placing traps, who had defensives, who needed heals. It was a very good fight. I think if they deleted Mechagon area, the dungeon would be way better.
What if they just deleted the last boss? Just a 3-boss
it's
dungeon.
not enough. Yeah, I think they had to delete Mechagon too. Yeah, because I think the last boss was also awful. If they made it more like Junkyard last boss, you know how Junkyard last boss, it's not about killing the totem, it's about getting up there and clicking the thing.
Yeah.
That would be a lot better. Because like the biggest issue with the totems is some classes could kill them and other classes couldn't. That's a huge problem, especially when you start getting into hierarchies. So, yeah, I mean, there's like, if they made count better in Mechagon too, that might have helped. I don't know. I think at most it's a C because there's just way too many weak points. There's only a couple of fun parts.
My main takeaway from this dungeon is that I think this would go up a full letter if there was just a portal at every single boss that you killed that brought you back to the center. Why do we have to run all the way back every time from each zone?
Yeah,
that's like the most annoying thing in the world.
Way too much running.
Yeah.
What's worse, running or RP? They're both kind of
probably
crap.
Running.
They're so bad.
I would say running personally, because
especially the Mechagon and Hakar area, because you couldn't even mount, so you literally are walking the whole way. You can't even mount.
Yeah. Like if it's straight running, I think running is strictly worse.
Yeah, season 4 I feel like made the other side feel better than it actually was, because getting woe and like skipping through the annoying stuff in the dungeon made the dungeon way better.
So like
Yeah, I mean, like,
going off of what Dorky was saying earlier, right? Like if this was a dungeon that popped up in like one of the seasons of Dragonflight, would you be happy or not happy to see it there?
Probably not happy.
Yeah,
well,
same.
that's how I feel about C. You know, like I actually wouldn't
Yeah.
absolutely hate it because, like, you know, DOS I had some good times with. I feel like it's not the worst dungeon, but I also wouldn't really want it.
Yeah, I think I don't know about the Legion dungeons, but I kind of feel like it has some redeeming qualities that make it fun. So I think it's kind of a high C. I don't think it's like a low, like, you know. I think there's more than like one or two redeeming
I'm okay
qualities
with
of
high
it.
C.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
All right. I think they could have fixed this dungeon too and made it a lot better, like pretty easily. Because that's sort of why I'm giving it that rank, is because, like, imagine if they just put portals by every area and then just made like either the Mechagon wing or the last boss just like less miserable. I feel like the dungeon was like 36 minutes. I feel like it would have been a lot better. All right. Next dungeon, Legion dungeon. I farmed this dungeon a lot in M+2, but I don't think that tells me very much. Is Darkheart Thicket.
All right, what are the fun parts?
What does chat think
What are
about
the fun
Darkheart Thicket?
parts?
Chat seems to kind of like it. Chat doesn't have any reasons why, but they like it.
Yeah, because they never did this in the high key.
Yeah.
I think
enjoyed farming this whenever we ran out of Maw of Soul keys to get AP early in Legion. This was my backup dungeon. I know that has no relevance to our conversation, but I played a lot of this dungeon.
yeah.
There was like a lot of
so
big
let's
pulls
see.
you did in this dungeon, right? And it was like pretty wide open.
Not really.
Not really.
No,
You
no.
couldn't in high keys.
No, you couldn't really pull that big. Like, there were only some parts where you pull sort of big. It's like between first boss and second boss, like all those flowers and stuff.
Yeah, and you could only pull like maybe 7 or 8 flowers tops. Like you couldn't pull that much.
All the stuff before first boss was heavily overtuned, like all the cats and the bears. You generally try to skip as much in the beginning as possible. I mean, there was a lot of count in the dungeon. It's just it's because like the stuff in the beginning was just so unplayable. And then first boss was kind of okay. It was kind of cool. Second boss was like interesting at best. Third boss is like kind of annoying. Last boss was also a huge check. It was just a one shot all day. Like even in like a middle high key, not even high key. Just like if you were just doing some mid level key, that boss would just one shot you super early on. It was also like pretty linear for the most part, even though it was pretty open. Just because like you couldn't fight the stuff in the beginning.
Yeah.
I have a question about count. Hold on, real quick though. So in Legion and BFA, it seemed like there was a trend of, even in linear dungeons, there would be a lot of count, and you would just be required to skip stuff. And in BFA,
I wouldn't say
like
required to skip stuff. It was just like,
I guess it depends. I guess I'm not talking about this dungeon specifically, but like it felt like there were a lot of dungeons where if you went in a straight line and you just like pulled what was along the way, you were above 100% count, and you were like, it was better to have some sort of skips. Whereas it feels like in Shadowlands, in the straight lines dungeons, now they just make it so you literally have to kill everything on the path. Like in Spires, like you just like go in a straight line through the whole dungeon basically. What do you think is better? Even considering like casual people too. Like, do you think requiring like, because in BFA, I was of the opinion that skipping stuff with like mandatory rogue or like weird invis pot skips were bad. But now that we're in a world where you just have to pull literally everything in the dungeon in a straight line and you don't really have choices on what to skip, I kind of almost miss being able to. But I used to think of it as a forced skip, but now I think of it as a being able to skip.
I think it depends
stuff.
on the flexibility of the skip, because like people say like, oh, forced skip sucks, but if you look at halls, everyone doesn't really mind halls because, you know, you just invis pot through that part, right? Like nobody fights the stuff between first boss and second boss in halls. Also, like Mist, right? Nobody fights that stuff in the beginning of Mist. You know, like the one with the one bow breaker and the, like, you know, like the one that everyone always Mindsuit skips or Zap skip,
that one pack or whatever. Yeah,
like I feel like a lot of these type of skips don't really matter. It's just The skips that are awful, I think those are the bad ones. Like the ones that have like true sight and you have to like do all these gimmicky stuff just to do the skip.
That's fair, yeah. I mean, even then though, I think for most people, average 15 level, even if it doesn't have true sight, if it's in the way, I feel like people consider that like a difficult skip. I don't know. It is kind of weird that like the halls one. I don't know.
Yeah, like,
I guess
people say the hall
enough,
skip is hard. I don't know.
I don't know. I would say I would. All right, well, here's the thing, right? The miss skip, I feel like people mess up a lot, but the hall skip, nobody messes up, right? Maybe it's because like there's one guy in the way, and people always try and like para it or whatever. Or they don't understand how it works, but then the hall skip, everyone always invis pods. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking at my MDT for this dungeon from back in the day. There's actually a pretty decent amount of variability in this dungeon. The biggest thing that you really had to end up skipping was the trash between the dragon and the last boss. There were so many casters in these packs that would just potentially one-shot your group. The summoners and imps were so dangerous. So people generally ended up skipping like the last 3 packs of the dungeon and just getting all of their count before the 3rd boss. Which means you did have to play the cats, which was difficult, but it was manageable because they always jumped on the furthest target.
Yeah, either way, I think this dungeon sucks. I think it's either low C or possibly even D.
Oh wow! Really? So the chat was giving this a lot of B's and A's. The chat was giving Darkheart Thicket a lot of B's and A's.
I think I completely disagree with you. I would put this in the B tier. I think it was just a generally solid dungeon. I would not mind if this was put into my pool. I mean, I would assume that they would just have to completely rework how the last boss works because that just wouldn't fly nowadays. But the rest of the dungeon was fine.
So Dorki, do you think if they gave this dungeon some tuning passes and they fixed some of the BS like mobs and bosses, it would be better?
If they fix it, I do think it would be better for sure. But like, I just don't see this dungeon being playable nowadays. It's way too bad. Like I think not only are the trash unplayable, but also the bosses are unplayable. Like anyone who says it's better than a C is only because like they enjoyed it thematically or they thought it was cool, but I think it's just unplayable.
Oh, there are people who probably don't know how this last boss works. Let's talk about that a little bit.
It just like blows up at 50%, right?
Well,
and you just have to be like 100 yards away or something.
Well, no. So there were 2 mechanics that the boss did most of the time. There was the Nightmare Bolt cast, which if it goes off, it just about one shot you, but wouldn't quite one shot you for the first half of the boss, but once the boss gets to 50%, like you said, it blows up, does a ton of damage to everybody, and then the boss actually starts gaining damage if anyone gets hit by one of the little pools on the ground. So if the boss gains any of those buffs and then Nightmare Bolts somebody, it would probably one-shot them. Also, Feed on the Weak, which was another ability the boss did, was a drain that really couldn't be dodged and did more than your max HP over the course of like 4 seconds. So it was
like a cascade times 3.
Yeah, pretty much. So it was just one-shots on one-shots on one-shots, and I don't think that boss design is good nowadays. I think they'd have to tune that a little bit.
Yeah, literally everything was a one-shot. The explosion was a one-shot, the suck was a one-shot, the boats were a one-shot.
I think
the strategy for this boss was to have your 2 ranged players stand literally max distance, and if they get targeted by a Nightmare Bolt, they blink or teleport away, and it fizzles the cast from the boss. That's just how you did this boss back then.
I think Dorki's definitely right, and the dungeon's probably dog water. But I'll say that I feel like it sounds like it's mostly a tuning issue. Like if the tuning was better of some of the things, like if they tweak some numbers, then the dungeon becomes a lot better. So I don't think I'd really think it's fair to give it like a low D or a low C or a D. So I don't know, maybe high C. Is it better or worse than DOS? That's the question. What about Black Rook Hold and Arcway? I feel like chat definitely thinks it's better. All right, we'll give it.
I would be fine with putting in B just because it's a shorter dungeon, but I would not want to see this dungeon returned.
What if it was tuned better though? You just don't think they would.
I mean, I could see it being in a B. To be honest, like I'm down to put it in a B.
I wouldn't necessarily be happy to see this, but I wouldn't be unhappy to see this. I'd just be like, okay, that's cool. That's there.
We'll leave it at the top of C. We'll leave it at the top of C. All right, next dungeon. This.
How did you feel about that dungeon?
Darkheart. I didn't really do it
like
on much high keys. I did it in lower keys, and to me it seemed okay. To me it seemed like a lot of the dungeon you could pull reasonably big. The only area where I feel like was really, really annoying for probably pugs and higher level groups was the healers. That whole area where there was like healers, and if you pulled like 2 of them, it was like miserable. The like dryads or whatever, or maybe there were flowers or like that area. That area seemed really
yeah, they
dumb.
talking about the one guy who heals all the flowers.
Yeah. And so, but it felt like a lot of the pull, but I didn't do it in high keys where you couldn't do those pulls. So when we did these dungeons, we would just like pull pretty big. I think the bosses weren't particularly good. I think the bosses were, like, out of the Legion bosses that I've played, at least, they seem like some of the less fun ones. And I don't know, I felt like it was okay. I would have probably
actually, now that I think about it, to be honest, it just feels like a Shadowlands dungeon except overtuned. That's like the best way I can explain it.
An overtuned Shadowlands dungeon.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, it's just an overtuned Shadowlands dungeon. There's like nothing really special about it.
Yeah, I agree. Which I think then C tier seems fair right next to DOS. Alright, Eye of Azshara. This is a dungeon, along with Court, these are the only 2 Legion dungeons that I feel like I can talk a decent amount about. How does chat feel about Eye of Azshara? I feel like there's a lot of things that you can say about this dungeon that aren't just a letter. Seagulls, boat skip, crab poles, pocket sand.
Seagulls. Oh, God.
S for crabs. Seagulls, crabs. So here's my thoughts about this dungeon. I think not every dungeon has to be like this, but having dungeons where it's just super wide open and it's like a complete sandbox where you can go whatever way you want and pull whatever trash you want are super, super fun and like very interesting with routing. I think it was a little too big when you consider like going up to Deepbeard and all that area. Like it was, I think, almost a little too big because it was a 5 boss dungeon. I think I overall, like, there was a few, like, I definitely could not give it an S tier. I think there's a few things in the dungeon, like having the winds and like the random lightning bolts and some of the trash like being very, very strange, like the snails that wouldn't move. Like overall, I liked the layout of the dungeon and the way that you could pull big and do a lot of cool stuff. But I definitely there are definitely problems. I don't know. I didn't do like super high keys in Legion though. Was it much different in Legion?
So, no, it was exactly the same. So it's a really big dungeon with very little options. That's the best way to explain it.
Little options, really?
Yeah, because of the one, because of the crabs. You always fight the crabs, right? If you weren't fighting the crabs, like what the hell are you even doing in that dungeon? 2 is you've never ever went right. Like I don't even know what the hell's on the right side. I know Zara talked about like doing this in his MDI, whatever the hell. I literally have never been to the right in the entirety of Legion. I don't know if anyone has ever gone right. Everyone always goes left. And yeah, like half the trash was just awful. You would never fight any of the trash. You would just fight. You fight the 2 or 3 Nagas that spawn the bosses, and you fight some of the stuff in the beginning, and then you fight only stuff around second boss area to clear it out. I think if it didn't have that whole crab part going on, I think this dungeon would have been better. But it's not bad. I mean, it's a really open dungeon, like everyone has been saying. The bosses are pretty alright. I think like the first boss is kind of cool. The Naga boss is a little bit overtuned, but it's still pretty cool. You can plan out your CDs and stuff. Snake boss was like, okay. I think Deepbeard was boring as hell. Last boss was kind of cool too.
Really, I kind of liked Deepbeard. I thought the mechanic on Deepbeard where you had a shield that you had.
I mean, it was an interesting mechanic, but it was so boring. I felt like that fight was just drags on.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't like the visuals in Deepbeard too. Like I caught on eventually, but I felt like the way that you would drop the spots on the ground and then they would persist for the whole fight, but they were like not super visible, like where the whole area was kind of frustrating. Like I figured it out eventually, but I could see that being an annoying dungeon for people to pug or whatever.
Okay.
So you think illusion of choice? See, that honestly, that's sort of what I was saying about Atal'Dazar though. I was saying Atal'Dazar. So you think there's a lot more
Well,
choice
but it's not,
in
though. I mean, 'cause, like-
Atal'Dazar than I have Azshara?
Yeah, because the Atal'Dazar, you always pick and choose where you want to pull your stuff at the time. Whereas Azshara, you just always go exact same pathing.
Yeah, I mean, because so the whole bit behind the right side being a real path, you only went right with right side in the context of the MDI because it was speed based. Only then, and it was only if you didn't have a way to get on to do the boat skip. And the only thing you did is you just went through the cave, same like you would have on the left side either. Anyway, so it was no different from going left. It was just you killed Deepbeard first, so there really wasn't that much of a choice in this dungeon. It was just about where you were getting all your Murloc / crab trash from, because you could do a similar large pull on the right side with Murlocs that would give about the same trash count as the crabs.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I'd say it's a B. It's like pretty okay.
I think
bad,
B is
not
fair.
great.
Yeah,
I don't
B's
think.
fair.
Yeah, I don't think we can put it in A tier, but I would say I don't know. What do you? I don't know. Cohen, would you put it above or below Cohen?
I would put it. See, again, I'm biased. I wanted Cohen in A tier.
Oh, true.
I'd say for most people, it's probably above Cohen.
I feel like you guys kind of want to put it. Both of you guys want to put it below Cohen.
Nah, I want to put it above.
Okay, all right. That's kind of what I would say too, from what I heard. But okay, next dungeon. Here it comes. The dungeon of BFA.
Oh, everyone already knows.
Everyone already knows. Freehold.
Before you slam it in S tier like we know you want to, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Here he comes.
This dungeon was only really high-key progressible at the highest level
Warlock.
1 out of every 6 weeks.
Warlock talking.
Yeah, that's the biggest weak point for sure.
Because you needed to have it on Fortified and you needed to have no Eudora.
Warlock talking.
Yeah. So let's talk about strong points first before we get into that.
I think the variety, like we talk about replayability, the variety of like the game or whatever. Not my favorite personally, but it did add a little bit of like, okay, you need to think a little bit about your route from week to week. I would say
we
Pug's
never played it the
probably
same from the beginning of the expansion
Yeah.
to the end. Like even on the very last push week, every group was doing a different route for that.
Yep. And there, dude, we were doing some crazy stuff too. Remember, we would like go
The Six
up
Flag
in
route.
the Six Flags route where we would go up by the houses and stuff. Yeah, there was definitely a pretty big variety of pulling there. I think to mini play devil's advocate, I think the trash layout is good. I think the bosses were not good. I don't think any of the bosses were particularly.
You don't think
that
any of the
good
bosses
in
were good?
Freehold.
I love the first boss. I think the first boss was really good.
Really?
Yeah,
I
like
don't
know,
know.
the entire fight was really cool. I mean, there was just so much going on, like having to bait, understanding the bird mechanic.
It was like
playing your defenses
okay. It
properly
was
and
like
stuff.
okay, but it was kind of gimmicky. I mean, I felt
I
like
mean, yeah, like it did get overtuned in the end. I do like that's the only thing I
Yeah.
can say about.
Well,
that
and here's
fight.
the other thing too. Oh, again, I guess we only played Fortified, but I mean that dungeon was unplayable on Tyrannical. Like it was literally
Well, to be fair,
unplayable.
that was just BFA in general.
Well,
BFA
yeah,
was
true. I
unplayable
guess
in
probably
Tyrannical.
true
Yeah,
for like
it's
all of
replayable.
these dungeons
Just
before
Tyrannical's an issue. Yeah, I mean, you should
it
see
is,
Legion.
yeah.
Legion Tyrannical
Legion.
was way worse.
Oh yeah,
was
you know how
way
people
worse,
talk
man.
about keys being closed right now? Yeah,
Yeah,
tyrannical
Yumytv
keys were
bad.
Yeah.
actually closed. Nobody logged
Actually
on tyrannical
closed.
Yeah.
keys.
I don't think that's the dungeon
Yeah.
issue. That's just Tyrannical. Not like that's why everyone's been saying delete Tyrannical for literal years now. It's also I thought second boss was good too. I don't like even though Eudora was considered very bad to play. I thought it was fun to play, and if it was actually like tuned properly, I think that'd be one of the best fights.
I also
I
think
enjoyed
for,
a lot of aspects of that fight.
for tanks in particular, it was a pretty decent skill cap boss, right? Making sure you
Yeah, there was so much going on. Yeah, like having to
moving
drag
things out of
properly.
bad and out of good.
Yeah, tanking like where to tank the boss. There's like a decent amount of like healing and DPS had to like know. When
Yeah,
to
man, I literally
was.
was just had to stand on the roof. That's what I did
Yeah.
on that, but I had to stand on the roof.
Okay, but going back, I mean, obviously, going back to what Dorki said about, our tier system, regardless of any problems with the dungeon, if this was ever a dungeon that was reintroduced
Yeah,
for a season,
you're
we would all be
pogging
fucking
out.
ecstatic.
Yeah,
We're
yeah. I mean,
pogging out.
this
It's
is
an
this
easy
is the
S
dungeon
tier.
where I would. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be S tier, like regardless of what we're going to talk about, because this is the only dungeon where I would be fine having it every single season.
That's true. That's true. Well, again,
Like it just has infinite replay value.
now that we have to do tyrannical, I think the bosses would need tuning, but I'm not going to hold it back from that. I think...
I mean, tyrannical is nerfed compared to before, so it would even be
That's
easier,
true.
I feel like.
Yeah, it's 20
That's
now,
true.
right? Is it 20 now? Pretty sure it's 20% now, right? Tyrannical and
I
fortified.
have no idea.
I think...
know.
I don't know. I think I would probably be a doomer and not put it in S tier. I think by judging it by replayability and like the fact that most people play DPS, I would, people probably like this dungeon, but I think the bosses were
Well, what about the healers? The healers like this dungeon, since your chat is full of them.
Yeah, okay. What would healers? What would you rank this
I think the
dungeon? And
biggest thing
only
is-
healers. Only healers can vote. Only healers can vote. What tier would you put it in? Only healers can vote. What tier would you put it in? See, it's a lot more split now, right? You see that? There's definitely still some S's, but there's a lot more A's and B's. See that? Yeah, like I'm not. It's definitely not a bad dungeon. Like,
I have something
don't-
to say about that.
Okay. Yeah, healer talking. Yeah. Healer takes mute.
Hey, I mean, there's a lot of S's though, so the fact that healers still say S, I think goes to say a lot.
Yeah, that's
I don't even
fair.
know what dungeons healers would want to replay forever.
Oh, Waycrest.
Temple of Sethraliss,
Oh wait,
maybe?
no spoilers. No spoilers. But I do think S tier's fair. I think it was definitely better than Atal'Dazar. It's definitely better than Quarter Stars. So like the worst thing I would do would just be putting it in high A. But
I think just
S
following the
tier is fair.
criteria in general. This is
Yeah.
part of the dungeon that people would want to play
Yup.
the most out of any dungeon that exists.
Mhm. I think that's fair. All right, next one, Shadowlands dungeon. Now we'll see how it stacks up. Halls of Atonement. Everyone said this was going to be the Pogger dungeon. It was like one of the first dungeons that came into beta. It's
What's fun
gone
about this
through
dungeon?
many iterations. What does chat think? What is good about? Everyone just spams letters. At
Yeah,
least
just spam letters. Like,
give us some
why,
stuff to
Volley?
talk about.
Why?
Just say,
Give
why
us some
is it
stuff-
fun? Why do you guys
Give
like
us
this
some
dungeon?
stuff to talk about.
Even if you're gonna put in D, why do you guys like this dungeon?
All right,
there's
here's
gotta
what
be
I
some
think.
parts
Here's
you
what-
like about this dungeon.
I think big pulls. I like the big pulls. I like that it's not too long. I like that there's some variety in routing. Yeah, those are my favorite parts of the dungeon.
Well, that's another thing about Freehold too. It's a short dungeon.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
always
that's
like a
true.
sub 30 minutes dungeon whenever you play.
What's crazy is that it's a short dungeon, but it still has a bunch of like you're still pulling so many mobs. Like you probably pull 50% more mobs than you do in Spires, and it's a shorter dungeon by like what 9 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things Dorki and I talked about with this dungeon, we did just the Shadowland dungeons a few days ago, was this is another one of those dungeons where it's kind of like illusion of choice. Like you have a ton of open
Yeah.
trash in the front,
Yeah.
but really like you have to pull around the 3 shards. You really don't
Yeah.
pull the trash in between first and second boss. And you just get like 85% of your trash before you go to the second boss, right? Or 80% of your trash before you go to the second boss.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the main things that keeps it away from being an S tier dungeon for me, but it's still pretty
Yeah.
great dungeon in general.
Yeah. I think it's if it wasn't for the shards and if it wasn't for the curse requirement, I think this dungeon would go up much higher. Also, some of the bosses were kind of boring. Like I think only Halkias, or not Halkias. I guess Halkias was kind of fun because you pull stuff into it. But like only between Halkias and the second boss, those were like the only fun bosses. I was fine with like all the trash for the most part. Like I think shards add to healing, but you have all the other stuff that just like do a bunch of tank damage. I think it's like a solid A too.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think so. You don't like the shards?
Oh, I don't like them being a mandatory requirement
okay.
to like like in terms of like routing around.
Yeah,
'Cause
especially
you
with the
basically
RP.
just play-
Yeah,
Yeah, you basically just rank them around, or you just like route around the 3 shards. Like it would always go shard, break pull, shard, break pull, shard, break pull, and a boss.
yeah. I think this dungeon, the bosses aren't my favorite, but they're also not egregious. Like they're just kind of whatever bosses. Like I think this. I mean, people might be mad, but I think this dungeon has better bosses than Freehold. Like at least Freeholds were at least like abusive and like I don't know, you had to like cheese them. This dungeon, I feel like are just kind of like whatever.
Well, it's
Definitely
just
the
boring. That's the big thing. Like,
yeah,
especially third boss and last boss.
yeah. Well,
Just
the
for
last two
drag.
bosses are the worst. I think
Yeah, like
I don't
especially third boss, it
yeah.
just literally does nothing.
Third boss is definitely the worst boss. I don't totally hate the last boss because I kind of don't mind the idea of like a like nerve check last boss where sort of like Zyro was saying about the last boss of Atal'Dazar, like it's not really super crazy like difficult, but it's just
Atal'Dazar is actually engaging though, and there's like stuff going on.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, the Atal'Dazar last boss is definitely better, but even still, though, I don't like the okay, like you have to pay attention and dodge shit, and it's not really that complicated kind of last boss versus like I don't know some stupid last boss like DOS or whatever. Yeah, some of the trash does feel kind of I don't know. Like I think the more you pug this dungeon too, like this is a less friendly pug dungeon because if you're not following that formula.
No, this is definitely a pug-friendly dungeon.
You think so? You
Nice
think this is?
halls.
I bet a lot of people.
It's more pug-friendly than like say Plaguefall or Top or Spires or I don't know, like half the dungeons literally.
All right, what does chat think? Is this dungeon hard or easy to pug? If you're whatever level you're at, do you find this dungeon hard or easy to pug?
Well, I think
I think one of the easier ones.
If you're
I
doing
think
your
a lot of
weekly
people
15,
will say hard.
You just don't
A lot
even
of
have
people
to
say
bother
hard.
dispelling curses because they just do like a third of your HP on 15.
Yeah, it's easy. You don't even do anything in this dungeon.
Yeah, maybe just in like pug levels, all the stuff is like forgiving. Easy until the thrust one-shot melee. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. Yeah, okay, there wasn't that many hards. Maybe I'm just like thinking about like pugging 25s or whatever.
It's just the dungeon is really simple. There are mobs that cast bolts and curses. There's a shard who thrashes. There's some curse. There's some magic debuff that goes out, and then there are stuff that beats your tank. Like that's the entire dungeon.
Yeah,
there's
it's
no
hard
other
on the
trash.
tanks for sure.
But I mean, there's like literally no other mechanics, right? It's like similar to Freehold where it's not too challenging. There's no like hard kicks that like if they go off you wipe like Goliaths.
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of the better dungeons of Shadowlands. I feel like it's very close to what I would rank like where Atal'Dazar and Quarterstars are. That's about where I put it.
Yep.
I think like talking about replayability though, I think it's worse than those two.
I also agree with that.
I think if we're talking about strictly
stars.
Yeah, I feel like
right around Quarter Stars.
Okay, this is about where I put it.
In between the two?
I think these are pretty close. I think Atal'Dazar is more replayability. I think both of these two are like kind of the same. I think Halls has a lot more fun trash. Quarter Stars has more fun bosses and replayability, but they're both pretty close.
Yeah, again, if we go back to our criteria, A was like you would be happy seeing it, but like you wouldn't want to have it every single season.
Yeah,
just be nice to have it there.
Basically, like this is Pog levels of what if like season 1 Dragonflight. It's like these are the dungeons that are coming back. How would you feel about that? All right. Oh boy, the next dungeon is Halls of Valor.
Okay.
I'll just say right now it's an unplayable dungeon nowadays.
Yeah, it does. It would not. It just would not work.
Literally unplayable.
Yeah.
I think we just automatically put in D for now, but we can talk about it.
All right, Zyro, talk about this, and then I'm gonna DM Dorki something.
Okay.
All right, so similar to Arcway, 45-minute long dungeon, longest dungeon we've ever had. The bosses in general were like pretty pass-fail checks, right? Horn of Valor on the first boss did a ton of damage. Your tank could dodge the bleed, so it didn't really do much. As long as you dodged the swirlies and could live through the Horn of Valor, there wasn't a lot to it. But let's get to why the dungeon's actually unplayable. So on the left side of the dungeon, there's a boss called Herzha. And Herzha just does a bunch of one-shot mechanics. Like actual one-shot mechanics. Dorki and I did a VOD review of the world first 29 fortified of this key back in Legion. Everyone was wearing 20% avoidance, max HP gear. They were all wearing the Shieldtron. I think it was called the emitter trinket from the raid, which lets you put like Ishkar's emitter. Gave a 1.5 million shield to anyone in the group. You had to have these to live through the boss. There was no other way you could live. They still managed to barely kill the boss with their monk dying, I think, 3 times. Like, that boss was completely unplayable with that kind of gear, with Prida's 20% avoidance and defensive trinkets on everybody. Nowadays, with no gear swapping, it just wouldn't work in the context of the way the game works nowadays.
Yeah, so let's not even talk about Herja right now. Let's talk about all the trash. Literally every single trash pack from beginning to the end was Spire's first pull. Every single pack had
every single one.
No, every single pack. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, every single pack had at least 2 casters, up to 3, if not 4. And they would, like, so there was like one mob that lightning bolts would one shot you, like the Dark Lashes. There was another mob who would carve someone that would also one shot him when it channels him. There was another mob who healed. And the only way this was playable in Legion was because you would mass pull, spam all AoE stops, and then you would just hard kite. When the tank kites, the mobs stop casting completely.
Oh yeah, there's no slow ring anymore, so you have no way of doing that anyways.
Oh yeah, and then there was an archer mob who would just gun your entire team down. So there was an archer mob gunning your team down. There was a caster casting lightning bolts, one-shotting everyone. There was a carve guy who was one-shotting everyone. And then there was a healer that you had to kick. If you didn't kick, you would just like heal in full, right? And then like not only this, it was a 45-minute dungeon, and in the at the very end, it was literally Spire's Angels. So like everything you guys hated about Spire's Angel was exact same. You had to fight like 2 guys one at a time, and it was like a massive RP, and it did nothing. It just walked around the entire time. You just had to.
You had to live through wicked daggers. If your weak aura popped off, you hit a defensive, or you just got one shot. That was for 5 minutes. That was all you did.
Yeah, so I think
it was bad.
This dungeon is actually like my favorite dungeon aesthetically. I think it was probably like the coolest dungeon. It was literally the Norse version of Spires.
What boss were you saying Fenrir was just an exact copy of?
Last boss of Sanguine Depths.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it literally just jumps on people.
Jumps to people. Yeah, you're right.
And bleeds.
I will say, as a casual Halls of Valor player, I think aesthetically it's pretty cool. I think the beginning part where you're like in the sky or whatever, and then when you go to the foresty area, I think is also really cool. So not that means very much in terms of dungeon design, but aesthetically I think this is one of the cooler Legion dungeons that I enjoyed. It's not very like dark and like caverny. It's like really wide open and stuff.
Little neat
that
tidbit.
Was a sick dungeon.
Not too relevant to the conversation, but I think it's still kind of cool. Back in the very, very, very early, like first build Legion Alpha, this was the first testable dungeon. So this was like the intro to how Legion dungeons were going to be. Didn't get to test it on Mythic Plus, but I mean, you could imagine walking into that dungeon, seeing the visuals, seeing how 5 bosses. It was a pretty cool concept. We didn't know how bad it was going to be though at the time.
It's just such a long dungeon too, man.
Okay, so this is the first dungeon that we're putting in the D tier, and we deem this as completely. We do not want this dungeon to come back whatsoever.
Complete trash. Yep.
Complete trash. What are some things that both of you guys would suggest that would make this dungeon better if they brought it back that they would have to fix?
I think remove a lot of trash mechanics. But I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's like Spires, right? If you remove a lot of the trash mechanics, nothing really happens. I mean, obviously, tune the bosses. Like, I think the bosses are actually pretty cool if you can actually do them.
That's actually a pretty solid suggestion in the chat, though. If they removed the Herja wing, that removes the need to really rebalance things. They just have to change trash count. It would cut down on the dungeon time. You could probably remove 10 minutes of the dungeon, which would make it like a normal.
I would rather they remove Fenrir ring, to be honest.
That's fair. Remove one of the wings then.
Yeah, I'd rather they do that. Also, like the whole last boss area is just way too slow and boring. Like it's unreal. It's basically the end of Spires, but worse.
Or maybe remove that RP. Maybe remove the mini boss RP instead of one of the wings then.
Yeah, completely remove the RP. Make the mini bosses a little bit more engaging.
All right.
I'm not too sure what to do about all the trash early on. Like all the trash is just way too much.
I think it's like a terrible fix, but I think nerfing some of the trash mechanics so they're just like optional kicks instead of mandatory kicks might be something. Instead of just removing abilities, like like think about
nerf it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, just think about like some of the kicks in like the beginning of Streets, right? Like a lot of those kicks don't really matter, so it's kind of like there's a lot of kicks going on, but like you can let some of them through. Like that's something that they could do. I think it's like but they would. It sounds like they would need to giga nerf them.
Yeah, right now it's an awful dungeon though.
Okay, we can't talk about this dungeon without talking one of the greatest fails of all time. One sec.
Oh,
the titles.
is it a specific Moonkin fail?
Yeah, I know you guys are having a little bit of a scuffle recently, so I'm gonna have to find this clip here for you.
I don't think it's a good dungeon, but D is a high key take. Is this a high key only take? And for pugs,
No, it was only a
bad?
middle key. No, like even right now, it's unplayable. Like you literally, if you want to pug it into 15, good luck, buddy. Not
Really?
only good luck, buddy, but you're gonna spend 45 minutes there, and yeah, I mean,
Here, I'll link this in Billy.
look,
There's
is
the
Spires
video. Go to 4 minutes 17 seconds.
is Spires being bad a high key take? That's probably like the best way of comparing it.
Sorry for
Like
the
I'm pretty
flash.
sure Spires is just strictly
Top
bad in general.
7
There's no way
titles
Spires is
fails.
only bad in high keys.
Orange. And finally, in first place, we have What a Time to Be Alive, a fantastic
This
clip
titles
title.
clip here. This is range DPS POV.
Moonkin, very high skill cap, very impactful
Motherfucker, I
roll.
can't get bear that fast.
Oh, got charged by Scovold. It's a one shot.
It's okay, they have some reses.
They have a res.
Oh.
Ooh, res into fire. It's a one shot. One more res into a charge. It's a one shot.
He just gets up and walks away.
Trifecta within
He
10
just gets
seconds.
off. He just gets up from his computer. Oh, that was good.
That's that
That's a
title
great
shit.
one. All right, next dungeon. They have the same icons, so we got to do one at a time. Let's start with upper. Return to Karazhan upper. What are your guys' thoughts on it? Also, chat too.
Yeah,
What does
don't
chat
just put
think
a
about
letter.
Upper?
Put what's good.
They're
about
all
it.
just gonna put a letter.
I was gonna- Yep. There it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think one of the main good parts of this dungeon was that the bosses were all challenging in kind of their own ways. There was a positioning requirement on the first boss. There was positioning plus a pretty solid healing check on the second boss.
And kicks and stuff.
And
There was
kicks.
a lot going on.
Third boss was kind of like this puzzle of how many immunities did you have alive and how many battle reses did you have alive, which probably wouldn't fly nowadays, but it was kind of challenging back then. It was like the only boss of its kind. And then the last boss was just, well, it kind of got cheesed, but it was a good boss before it got cheesed.
Yeah.
I don't. You go. Yeah, you go.
Okay, yeah. The bosses are pretty good. It's like Zara says. I think the bosses are strong points in this dungeon. Aside from that, this dungeon was literally upper Mechagon, whatever the hell you call it, workshop. There was no real trash. Like, you don't really do trash in this dungeon. It'd be like a couple of trash you would do. It basically felt like a mini raid, which was kind of fine. But I think the whole chest area, I don't know why people enjoy it. It's so boring. And the RP was actually immense. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't really realize it until I watched back some of the VODs. You had like some really long wait times. But overall, I would say it's a pretty good area. It's a pretty good dungeon.
It feels like pretty mid to me. Like, it reminds me of, I don't know, it's sort of like how I feel about a lot of the Legion dungeons. There's some pretty cool bosses. I think the Mana Worm is cool. I think the one wizardy guy that I don't remember his name. Everyone talks about him being very difficult, but like that also seems like a cool boss. Yeah, it feels like it when we did it. So in the seasonal affix where you get the dreadlords or whatever, we had like almost no dreadlords at the end of the dungeon, and that's just because there's so little
There's no trash.
Like, you really have to go out of your way to get the guys or whatever. And I think I don't know, it was okay. It was like pretty mid. I kind of also agree that there's way too much RP, way too much walking around. Like, it's just unnecessarily big, which is crazy considering that it's half of the mega dungeon or whatever. So yeah, to me,
it used to be a raid. That's why it's literally a raid.
Oh, well, okay, so that was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So they made it out of a raid area. Yeah, I mean, I think pretty mid to me. A lot of the lower dungeons are like older dungeons though, so I have to me it's definitely worse than I have Azshara, but like not that much worse. Like, I wouldn't put it as bad as DOS, so maybe like low B for me.
I think that's fair. I would probably put it in A, just for me, but I mean, again, biased because I enjoyed the dungeons back then and I played a lot back then.
Ooh, A tier.
This was probably the very first like dungeon design that had that Shadowlands-esque design, right? what we were talking about earlier, where
it's
you
very
press W
fancy.
through the dungeon, and you make maybe like 1 or 2 choices on what to skip or pull. Like 99.9% of the trash in this dungeon was figured out. You had to choose between pulling like a spider in the Mana Devourer room, or like an extra bat when you were running up to the chess event. Like those were your trash choices in this dungeon, because nobody ever pulled the ghosts at the start of the dungeon because they were just hilariously overtuned. So those were your choices. You had like no trash choices, pretty much.
I'm very between A and B too. It's hard to say.
Okay, so you guys actually are both putting it ahead of Eye of Azshara then.
It was
Yeah, for
definitely
sure.
better than Eye of Azshara.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the bosses is what really carries this dungeon, because like this is one of the dungeons where the boss fights are like actually good.
What was the
Instead of
length
just
on
being-
this dungeon again?
It was very short. I think it was
About
like
thir- about 30
36.
minutes.
See, like
30
this is
yeah,
like
35,
this is
I think.
a
35.
textbook example of a dungeon, in my opinion, where not every dungeon needs to be some complicated, super open dungeon. Like people are just fine with a dungeon like this coming back because like the bosses are fun. It's not super long. Like, you know, I think they need to learn from that when they, you know, like I understand that they want to have a variety of different types of dungeons, but in the like linear, like lots of corridor type of dungeons, I feel like they need to really focus on having well-designed bosses and like not making it unnecessarily long.
Yeah, even though this dungeon was like 36 something on timer, it's actually like more like in the 20s, because this dungeon was always, you did this dungeon pretty quick.
Yeah. I think the closest comparison to nowadays, this is like really similar to Plaguefall. Like if you played this dungeon perfectly, it was a 2 chest. So it was actually
you didn't have to
short
play it
dungeon.
perfect, to be honest.
Yeah,
It was
that's
literally
true.
just, can you get past the bosses? Like if you wiped any of the bosses, well, I mean, the key's over. Because it was literally a raid. It's like a raid in the dungeon. It's hard to place this one. Like I'm down for a low A.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I like low A.
Okay, you
than
guys
high A.
like low A. There's no way the chat likes this dungeon better than Court of Stars, though. But they put it on the same level. We got some controversial opinions. There are people who are never typing in my chat again, even though they've never typed in my chat, and they're because Halls of Valor is D. There's people that aren't happy that Court of
I
Stars
mean, look,
is
I would
above
like to
I.
see these guys
There are
trying
people-
to play Halls of Valor nowadays. It's unplayable. Like I don't know what the hell they're smoking. Like sure, it was really cool in M0. Sure, when you were just doing a +5 key here and there, it was a fun experience. But if you actually try to do this in like a weekly 15 key or something, good fucking luck, buddy. You'll probably hate your life.
All right. Next dungeon, we did upper, now lower. This dungeon was so confusing when I did this. But I feel like I just didn't understand that much of it. What are the chat's thoughts on lower Kara? This dungeon had way more trash, right? In terms of like stuff that you pull. There's like a lot of like pretty big pulls.
I
in
think this
dungeon,
might be
right?
the most trash dense dungeon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Like
is.
almost the opposite of well, it had some interesting bosses in there too, actually, right?
Yeah, you want to start, Dorki?
Yeah, so I think this dungeon had a lot of problems, but it was also really fun to play in high keys. I think what made it really fun was really large pulls. Like literally you just go back to back to back massive pulls, and like this was DPS's wet dream. You would just like blow up every single pack. Fire Mage would just like come boost all over the place. There was a lot of RNG. Like the first boss was RNG. Morals was a little bit overtuned and RNG. I don't even know how you would do these large pulls nowadays with like the aggro table that we have now.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, like I don't know if you even can. The rest of the bosses were kind of lame. Like I think the only cool boss was like Morals, honestly. I feel like in terms of how this dungeon was played, it would have been like, for me it was like an A or S, but if I were to be more objective about this, I feel like it's probably just a B or low A. It just has way too many negatives. What about you guys?
I'm trying to see how much trash count there actually was in this dungeon. I'm going back in MDT and clicking every single trash mob just to see how
If
high
you count
it
the
goes.
beginning too, yeah, I mean you went high as hell.
Let me see. Well, I've done half of the zones and we're already over 100%.
Yeah, I mean,
there were a lot of choices.
Moros seemed like a fun healer fight. Also, the last boss seemed like kind of a... Was it Maiden of Virtue? Is that the name of the boss?
Yeah.
That boss also seemed like kind of a cool healer fight. There were a lot of very annoying corridors in very, very small areas that I wasn't a fan of. Like, the camera seemed not very good in a lot of it. It felt kind of unnecessary.
I don't remember that being much of
like
an
the
issue,
very
aside from,
beginning with all the guys and the
areas.
pennies.
I
And
guess
then...
I mean, you usually before you just skip all of that.
Yeah, so like
situations
there
where you,
was
like,
that
literally skip
area,
the
and
entire
then
wing.
yeah, like basically that wing was the annoying part. Also, like maybe remember not the guys with the flashlights, but like some of the areas around that, like some of the stuff around the stage.
Oh,
like
yeah,
when you
around
go
the
behind the
feeder,
stage and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, it's well over 200% trash count across the dungeon. Yeah, like you actually had a ton of choices. And this isn't one of those illusion of choice dungeons, right? Like you could actually go several different routes throughout this dungeon. There were a lot of routes that came around later in the season where you would actually pull a lot of stuff in the kitchen area, which was just like never pulled before because it was thought to be too dangerous. But with the right time to AOECC, you could pull it off. I agree with you guys. I think it's a really cool, like, I would be happy to see this dungeon come back because I think it's just a pretty solid dungeon. I think the biggest weak point is Maiden is just like the biggest nothing boss in the world, unless you're JB.
Ooh.
Holy the flame!
I also think one other negative is that the first boss is very RNG. There were three different bosses that you could get, and they were just completely different bosses, and they rotated on a week to week basis. So that was kind of annoying. But other than that, like I really like this dungeon. Like for me, this is right there with Upper Karazhan, probably below it, but maybe high B if you didn't like it that much.
Okay, so you guys are fans. I guess this one might have to grow on me. I feel like when I did it, it definitely was like not my favorite, but I also didn't do it that many times. Definitely gonna have to grow on me. Chat, I feel like chat wants to put it a little bit lower.
I'm honestly down to put it in high B too, because like it's got a lot of issues.
This was not a friendly dungeon. This was.
I don't know how it's gonna be played. Like I'm gonna have to see how it's played. Like that's the hard part. I think at the time it was easily A. In Legion it was like hard A or even S. But now I don't know.
All right.
This was also the easiest push key in Legion. This was the key that people wanted to push up high.
Yeah. This was like the Necrotic Wake if Wake wasn't full of dog shit.
Like Plaguefall, basically, then?
Well, I mean, Plaguefall was less fun than Necrotic Wake.
Yeah.
Like, Plaguefall had a lot of complicated stuff.
Dungeon that almost certainly will not be in the A tier. King's Rest from BFA. What does chat think about King's Rest? And I think I have a feeling
Not just letters.
I have a feeling I know what they're gonna say.
It's actually kind of mixed, honestly.
Yeah, it's actually very mixed.
Wow, there's actually some higher.
I don't know how people say S. That is insane.
People are just saying S because it's Twitch chat.
Yeah, I mean because they
everyone's
like it.
Just saying
S means that you would want this dungeon every single
people
season.
Are typing like Z and stuff.
S
slime. Oh god, fucking morons, man.
Man, this is look at the beginning S plus because it dropped artifact power. Okay,
man, who the hell cares?
All right, THD.
Is that THD? Yeah. It was.
Yeah.
All right. Honestly, I think I sort of miss King's Rest after not playing it because like after experiencing Shadowlands, it's like like after playing Shadowlands, I'm like, man, I might as well play King's Rest if I'm gonna play dog shit. But I think the bosses are cool. It's a very linear dungeon. Trash was oppressively hard. I mean, but I think the bosses were cool. I think that's the biggest thing. But the trash was just like really rough. But it was like a rough challenge. I mean, it just feels like Shadowlands, honestly. King's Rest feels like Shadowlands, except I would rather play King's Rest than Shadowlands.
Wow. I'm gonna support a little bit of what you're saying in that I do feel like people like Omega hated on King's Rest, but I don't really think it was that bad. Like it definitely was not my favorite dungeon, but to say that it was like the worst dungeon in the world, like there wasn't really that much. So I think some of the biggest problems with the dungeon was that this was a dungeon where you needed mandatory rogue crazy skips or whatever, and it was like especially obnoxious with the
That's not
last
true.
area. No way, it definitely is true.
You just
With Awakened, you didn't need it, but
well, even
without
without
it, it was
Awakened,
hard.
even
Well-
without Awakened, you would just fight like the front stuff, and then you would just like invis pot to the third boss, and you clear some trash.
Yeah, you would invis pot to the third boss, and you had to invis pot back, and you had the.
Well, no, I mean you
brute
just
and
fight the stuff. You know, that's what I'm saying. Like you just fight the stuff.
I don't know. Yeah, I feel like you had, if you wanted to do a skip there, you had to double invis pot.
Yeah, well, that's only because you had to really optimize the route because the timer was actually really tight.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough dungeon. I don't know, Zyro, what do you think about King's
like
Rest?
It was just
the
hard
people
all
want
around.
the people want you to smite it down, I bet.
They probably do. One of my fondest memories of this dungeon was this fever dream, delirious state I was in at 5 a.m. in Columbus watching Chinese players play in the MDI in this dungeon.
Oh boy.
We gave them tyrannical, pre-nerf quaking, back when quaking did guaranteed 20% HP every time it ticked.
That's messed up.
And it took them 60 minutes to complete the dungeon. Like we almost mercy ruled them. The mercy rule would have come into play at 63 minutes. This was a difficult dungeon, like really difficult dungeon. I think that's a good thing though. Would I be happy to see it back though? No. Definitely not. I don't know, man. Like there was definitely a lot of interesting things in this dungeon. The bosses were interesting. I remember doing the council boss on Mythic 0 back when it first came out in BFA beta, and it took us like 5.5 minutes to kill it on Mythic 0. Like the bosses were really good. It's just it was too long.
Brought my
Trash was too
chips.
difficult.
I'll put them away.
There was actually a 5th boss in the dungeon, if you remember. His name was Shadow of Zool. That killed so many. That
Shadow
killed
of
so many
Zool.
Oh
runs.
yeah.
How did we talk this long about King's Rest without talking about Shadow of Zool?
It
That guy was
We
a
can talk about many
monster.
things. We can talk about the
Man.
bleeds from the berserkers. We can talk about the brute who just like beats your fucking tank and knocks everyone in the air.
Imagine
There were,
if
like,
we get to do
casters,
King's
too.
Rest again, except we're all dwarves like we are now.
Holy,
That wouldn't even be that
that's
bad, right? Because you could just bait the
Yeah.
bleeds and dwarf and stuff.
Well, it depends on
like-
what tank is meta, but yeah.
I think for
I would-
me, it's not D. I wouldn't. I
It's
don't
definitely
never
not
want to
D.
see it come back.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
still
that's
wouldn't
a-
be happy to see it come back. I think it's a C.
I would put it in a C. Yeah, I think it's a C too.
Here's where I'm
Certainly not a
pondering:
D for me.
better or worse than DOS?
I would say they're equally terrible, to be honest.
I think
they both have the good points, right? They're
I
actually pretty
think
similar.
DOS has more redeeming qualities than King's Rest. I think we put it right here below DOS.
I think because of Arden Wheel, that's like literally the only reason
Right.
DOS is
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, you're
If
right.
it wasn't for Arden Wheel, I think King's Rest would crush it. Like they have similar, like bosses are both pretty enjoyable. The trash is like oppressively hard in between. Yeah, I guess King's Rest is like right
this
around
this
there.
is kind of where I think I put it.
I think that's fair.
And keep in mind, this was the dungeon that like people hated the most. Well, all right, maybe there's
These
one
are
more
all
that we'll
like
get
40
to.
minute something dungeons.
Yeah, we see a pattern here, right? We see a pattern with the time of the dungeon and where we're ranking it in terms of replayability and fun. Hopefully, someone's paying attention here.
Dude, everything up there is short dungeons.
I mean, it's nice though that even some of these dungeons in C, like we can talk about their redeeming qualities, right? Like they were kind of a pain in the ass, but like they still at least had some fun parts, and you didn't like hate on them. Like so far, at least, this is making me a little more optimistic about dungeons.
I think
but
King's Rest is easily fixable to be like
Yeah.
actually a decent dungeon.
honestly, you just put a bunch of trash that like remove some of the trash on the bridge, and then just like add a bunch of trash that's just like, I don't know, stupid stuff that just like does nothing, so the pulls are bigger. Maybe tune a little bit of the like third boss, give it less HP, or like Zool. Yeah, it could definitely be a better boss.
Dude, why
Or a
did the
better
shamans
dungeon.
have an instant cast that could do 70% of your HP? Why could I just get
Oh,
frost
yeah,
shock for
remember
70%
Frost
of
Shock?
my HP? Like, why?
Oh, like
It was
yeah,
more than 70% towards the end.
yup.
It was the most
But
annoying
I had some good
thing
memories
ever.
with KR. I thought last boss was cool as hell.
Dude,
Honestly,
the
all the
memory-
bosses were pretty cool.
The memories. No, you. All right, I'm gonna step in here. You were one of the biggest KR haters.
Yeah,
You
because all the other dungeons were
hated
good.
KR.
I mean, the only reason why I don't hate as much now is because I experienced Shadowlands. It's like, you know, when you suffer a greater pain, it's like King's Rest is not that bad after all.
Dude, there were
But
times
like when you had all these
our,
bangers, man, I would take all these other dungeons over King's Rest.
our group would have 4 kings. Well, that's another thing too. Well, this is actually interesting to kind of think about is the dynamic that key re-rolling has. So the thing about King's Rest, and this is one of the things that I think made it so miserable, was that it was harder than the other dungeons, and it was just really, really brutal. And you couldn't re-roll keys, right? So when you had these hot, like you would time like a 29 freehold, and then you get a 30 King's Rest, and you're like, well, I guess we just like the key would literally de-level when you time the key because you got a King's Rest. But I think with key re-rolling and the fact that if the only time you do King's Rest is when it's a prog key and it's like a challenge, I think that would actually make it so much better, right? Like the fact that you never have to do a King's Rest homework key, I think would actually be kind of poggers.
I think also if King's Rest was doable on a higher key, because it's sort of like Sanguine Depths. You know how like Sanguine Depths, it's only really bad if it's like really hard. But if it wasn't really hard, I think it's fine.
Yup. All right. Well, sticking with BFA, we have 2 Mechagons. We'll do Junkyard first. What does the chat think about Junkyard? I feel like this is gonna be one of the most split dungeons. We're gonna see.
Divisive.
I already know what everyone's gonna say, but
everyone's gonna like it because you could do it in a high key. I bet this was like a pug friendly. Like,
I mean, yeah,
just
they just like having a bunch of stuff, and you just like pew pew pew, and you just like finish the dungeon, you get a bunch of IO.
Yep. If you lost the bot, the dungeon was a rip. That was, I think, one of the biggest problems with the dungeon.
That is by far the biggest problem. So I think, in terms of redeeming qualities, I think it had a really good amount of different trash. Like all the trash mobs were pretty diverse. There was also a lot of big pulls. Like there were so many mobs that don't really do anything, like the robots that just spin around, or the little trogs that just like run around, beat people or beat your tank. I would say like it's generally a well-received dungeon. It's just it's like Necrotic Wake. You don't actually play the dungeon. And what made it even worse is it was never about time. Like you always just play this dungeon super safe. You always just try not to die. I don't like this dungeon.
This dungeon, in my opinion, if they reduced everything in the dungeon's HP by like an appropriate amount, like I don't know, 25%, and then just removed the bots, this would be like the easiest slam dunk S like ever.
That is very true.
But because the bots were a thing, I just don't think it is. The bots just made this dungeon so annoying to play because you knew in the back of your mind there was this breakpoint where if you died too many times, the dungeon just became uncompletable.
You also knew in the back of the mind that like whatever damage you do in this dungeon literally doesn't matter, or like how big you pull, how you route, like literally nothing matters in this dungeon, and it just felt bad. I didn't feel like you were actually trying to go for time or like try to go for a high key.
Yeah, I think I agree with the bots being the central part of the problem. It's another one of those situations though where if you remove the bots, then obviously everything becomes crazy overtuned and you have to actually fix things. I feel like I don't necessarily mind the bots, but I think the buffs are like 10 times too strong. So I feel like it would be like, I feel like the bots, if they were like 5% of your damage or like 10%, would be like kind of a nice touch, but they were just like way too strong and way too impactful. So I'd kind of like to see everything being shrunk down, the mobs and the bots. It's tough because this was a fun dungeon to heal, so I have biased healer POV. Like Gunker was like a pretty AoE intensive like healing fight. The Trog was also like a pretty heavy AoE fight. The last boss was like lots of single target healing. Trixie and Nano was kind of like whatever, that was a weird fight. I probably enjoyed this dungeon more than most people, but only because like as a healer I'm still mostly doing what I did. So like me personally, like I would probably be putting it in like low B, but in terms of dungeon design it probably deserves to be in like C.
I'm down for B. I think B is actually a pretty good.
I think the people like it's hard for me to put it down there with like DOS and King's Rest when like the bots like the bots are like such a big problem and everything else about the dungeon is really chill.
Yeah, it's certainly not awful. I think it has replay value. So, I'd be like okay with seeing it.
Yeah, like I'm
I
not.
wouldn't want to
I'm
play it
not
all the
super
time,
upset
but
at that it's
it's
coming
okay.
back. Like I'm definitely excited
okay.
to do some high junkyard keys again, but who knows how long that's gonna last.
Yep, I think that's
Zyro,
fair.
you like it?
I don't know if I'd go low B. I think it's
Mid B?
for me. I think it's a little higher than that.
Zyro's a man of the people. He wants to put it up a little bit.
Well,
I mean, if you do compare with these dungeons, I sort of agree. I think it's like above average Azshara.
you have to remember
Oh,
though.
okay.
I also got to do more than big dam in this key because I got to spell steal some shit, which was
yeah.
fun. So, in the control required for the mage on the last boss to make sure you lined up the spell steals properly and interrupted it in to make sure you one phase the boss. I think that was kind of fun. I do worry a little bit that this dungeon might have been carried a little bit by the Awakened ethics because we never played this in Mythic Plus.
I don't agree with
Awakened,
that.
right?
I mean,
You
where
don't?
do you really need Awaken, though?
I mean,
I think the
cats
biggest
were-
part
You
is
have
the
perfectly
very
fine
end.
throughout the dungeon.
I think the
Even
rest
that,
of it
though, I
is
mean,
fine, but
Like,
yeah.
what about the end though that you need Awaken for?
The cats and the robot, like the cars.
But you can just walk by just fine without the whatever. You just have to like wait around patrols and stuff.
I mean, you
I
have to
don't
pull
know. I mean,
at least
you don't
one
need
car
it.
back.
Nah, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure.
I mean,
you don't need it.
so the route that we would do, I mean, we like you get Trixie and Nano, right? You're at Trixie and Nano, and then there's like the whole wall of the shooter guys that you wouldn't pull, and then there's the path, but you would skip the robots at the gate, and you would skip the shooter guys, and you would skip the cats behind them, and you would skip the cars.
Yeah, but you could just walk by them. Like I'm pretty certain. I remember just like walking around so many different times.
Yeah, you were
You
Druid.
would just die and walk back. No, like even if you weren't a druid, but they had true sight, so it didn't even matter.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to see it. Like the problem is just we never had to worry about it because it was only in season 4, right? So maybe there are going to be ways that we can maneuver around. I mean, I think
we'll have to see, but
most
I'm
of the
pretty sure it
dungeon
was
is
not
not
affected
bad.
much
Yeah,
by Awaken at all.
I think in between the first 3 bosses though, it won't really matter if there's Awaken or not. My only issue is like getting from the the third boss to the last boss, whichever ones you pick. All right, so what about Workshop? Junkyard somehow ended up high in the B tier, above a lot of dungeons. What do you guys think about Workshop? What does the chat think about Workshop too?
Workshop feels just like Upper Karazhan. I think a lot of the bosses were like pretty decent. Actually, I mean maybe a little bit more boring than Karazhan, to be honest. The trash was also just really whatever. I think the Gauntlet's gonna suck without Awaken, but it's whatever also. Man, I don't know. I just don't feel like this dungeon really has that many redeeming qualities. But it's also not awful. It's just like okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm putting it that high. I think a lot of I think the gauntlets, all the running, all the RP, cool in Mythic 0, not cool in M+. Like I don't really find that something that I want in my M+ dungeon. It was very, very linear. You had to pull, there's basically no choice of mobs. You would either pull a big robot at the end or a car in the beginning or like a dog or something. The bosses were okay, but none of them were really that fun. This to me was not particularly one of my favorite dungeons. I don't know if I would put it near Junkyard and Eye of Azshara. I'm even tempted to put it in C tier. Maybe I might be hated. The chat was giving me lots of A's when I talked about this dungeon.
I think Machinist Garden is one of the most cool bosses ever made, just because of how challenging it is once you get past the 2-minute mark. Like that is the biggest skill check boss I think they've.
Yeah, I like those kind of bosses.
Yeah, okay, Machinist Gardens is cool. I forgot about that boss.
The amount of times you're just chilling on the fight and then randomly 2 of your DPS just get one shot 100 to 0 because they get run over by a
as a healer, those aren't the most fun moments.
Well, I mean, the fun for you should just be being able to dodge and keep people up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I like the dodge aspect. It just adds a little bit of depth instead of just pressing your numbers. But I don't know. I would be down to put it in the lowest B too, because I can't really see it being worse than these C dungeons. I'd be okay with seeing this dungeon. That's the way I see it.
Yeah,
I don't hate it, but I also don't like it.
I know you didn't really get to do this much, Growl, but you'll get to do this next season. Get to mind control some squirrels.
Oh,
yeah, I'm interested how that's gonna go down. And yeah, I do agree. I'm definitely would be more happy with Workshop coming back than DOS or King's Rest. I'm definitely putting it above those two. All right, Miss of Tirna Scythe, the
That's a hot
ultimate weekly 15 dungeon of Shadowlands.
That's a hot one for sure.
What does the chat think about Miss of Tirna Scythe? Now we have a big skeleton of different dungeons, so I feel like now where we put the dungeons is more impactful, because now we have to say like this is better than this dungeon, which is worse than this dungeon.
Yeah, there's a lot of context now, which is fun. This was part of the gauntlet that we ran in Shadowlands beta. You know, the halls, the mists, and first pull of Necrotic Wake, then log off.
Yup. One of the fungeons of the beta. Chat is.
So I think the strongest points are the dungeon being really short and stuff being really simple. Like I think all the trash is really simple, so there's like nothing too crazy. But yeah, like by far the worst thing in this entire dungeon is the maze and the first boss. Like I think if they can somehow fix the first boss, and if they make it so that you can walk through the maze without having to clear the pack first, that way you can like sort of like you would still have to figure out the maze, but you know you can just like freely go through them first. Like I think if it wasn't for those two parts, this dungeon would actually be really strong.
Yeah, I think the pulls are pretty big. I think there's a lot of cool pulls. There's very, very little like annoying mini boss. Like the only one I think is the dragon. That's like, and you don't even get that all the time that you do it. I think the Mist minigame is cool. I think the second boss minigame is cool, but I agree that it doesn't make any sense that you can't open stuff while in combat. And it especially magnifies like an affix like Spiteful or whatever. Like Spiteful in this dungeon is so Omega Beans, where it just like slows you down so much in every single room. I think this is a cool dungeon. I think this is like a very, very like slightly above average dungeon. It's fun. Like we're definitely burnt on this because we've done it so many times, but I'm sure in 2 years we're definitely going to want to do a nice chill miss. I think the first boss, in my opinion, I don't think the first boss is that bad. I think earlier in the expansion it was worse, but now with how strong Holy Priest is, with how strong Holy Priest is, I think this dungeon isn't even that bad, because you can actually just live. Like, you can just hard live in a plus 30. Like, people are doing 30s and 31s of this dungeon without, like, doing any crazy shit. Like, Dorki's talking about, like, oh, Freehold first boss is good, but this first boss is terrible. But meanwhile, like, Freehold first boss, you literally had to, like, hide behind a signpost and pray to Ian that you don't get shot 3 times in a row in phase 1 if you want to live. Whereas this boss, like, yeah, the fears were a little weird. I don't know. I think Miss was pretty good. It doesn't quite have like the variety and replayability as some of the other A tiers, but I think it's probably better than all the other B tiers. I don't know. What do you think about it, Xyro?
Yeah, low A tiers were my thought process here. I think Dorki and I had the same like disagreement that you have. Right? I actually think the first boss is a good design. I think it's pretty unique compared to other bosses, right? The damage amp isn't that unique, but the double boss mechanic, you know, making it so that you actually have to kill the tree at some point rather than just being able to zerg the boss. I actually like it. It definitely is difficult, and it can be a really long boss. I think that's one of the major detractors is that like when you get to really high tyrannical key levels, like 1 key level bump can actually just increase that boss length by like about 1.5 minutes because you actually have to do it.
That's my real issue with first boss. Like I was listening to you guys. I don't think the issue with the first boss is surviving. Like I don't mind the amount of healing required. I don't mind the fears and shit. I mean, the fear is pretty bad, but like the real issue of the fight is it drags on for way too long and it scales exponentially. This is like one of the few fights where you're either doing a 4-minute fight or you're suddenly 1 key level higher and you're doing a 6-minute fight. Like, it should not work like that. I don't know.
Chat is madging right now. Can we get some chat clarification? I want to hear something from the chat. Chat is madging right now. They're hard disagreeing. They're saying my opinion is invalid. Are they saying it's I don't know. I said it's like probably like low A tier, like a pretty good dungeon. I think a lot of it's pretty good. Oh, they hate it. They hate Miss. Everyone is saying D tier. D and C tier trash dungeon. All right, come on, be honest, guys.
I think it has redeeming qualities. I mean, it's pretty split between.
Look at they're coming out. They're mad. All right. We have some Miss enjoyers. Some Miss enjoyers are coming back.
So last boss is actually the most fair part of this entire dungeon.
It's like, so fair.
I think last boss is like one of the bigger redeeming qualities of this dungeon. Like I think first boss is what heavily drags it down, and the maze.
Okay, how many D tiers do you think we'd have in the chat if this dungeon was released in early beta like variety? Where there were no green circles on the last boss.
Oh, dude, that would have been sick. I would be hyped for that.
That would have been. I mean,
I would be down for that, but like, I don't think anyone else. I also don't agree that it's an A vote. I would at most put it in a B because like I'm looking at A. Well, so also A would mean that like you would be okay with having this dungeon again.
I would be.
And
I think. Well, here's the thing: is I think. All right, let's hear it.
Actually, we'd be happy to have it. I guess, just not always.
Yeah.
I personally don't agree. I'm more on B.
I think.
Like,
I don't know. I think in 2 years we're gonna be like, oh man, I want to do a nice chill miss. Like I agree that right now we've done it so many times.
I do agree with that just because it's a nice short dungeon. It's simple. Like those are by far the biggest redeeming qualities of this dungeon. But I don't know. I mean,
are we pulling this? Is that what we're going to?
Yeah, I think I did a poll. Did it work? Let's get a true chat poll. Let's get a true chat poll. I put up the poll in the chat. What do you guys think about this?
I'm getting a feeling that it's probably going to land like right in between.
There's a lot of C's.
I think
there's an unbelievable amount of C's.
Well, D just doesn't make sense. Like I know as much as people hate it, D just doesn't make sense objectively because
I'll show the poll.
There's nothing in Mist that makes it unplayable in M+.
Yeah. So I think the people want from A to B. Like I think high B, low A.
Yeah, I mean basically what we're saying. Like it's either a low A or high B. I would personally just put in a high B.
I'm okay, that's fair. I'm okay.
I think for me, I think I would put it at the top of B.
Yep, I agree.
Yep. I also agree with that.
Oh man, this is gonna be another one. This is gonna be another very divisive one. What do we think of the Motherload?
I don't think it'll be too divisive.
No way, we're gonna get all over the board.
So I think one thing that has going for Motherload is it has so many good points. Like even though it's got some really big negatives, it's also got some really big positives. I think almost every boss was fun except for second boss. Second boss is one of the most boring bosses. Like the first boss was actually really fun. Having to kick the bombs in. There's like a pretty big healing requirement and like bursting all your big damage into the amp. That's like sick as hell. I think third boss was also really cool, like having to bait the spits and push them away, like the pipes.
Third boss, I think, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with third boss.
It was an engaging boss. That was for sure. It wasn't just a boring boss.
I think in Pug's third boss, also like Spell Reflect, that was a huge offender of that boss.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like it has like really big ups and downs.
Dude,
like I think
didn't do anything on third boss.
Yeah. Well, I think the really big up is like, it had a lot of. It was engaging, like the whole bait and move kind of whole like positioning, all that stuff. Last boss was also pretty engaging for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
The trash was also like there were so many different types of trash, and like the way you got count in that dungeon, I think that this dungeon might actually have the most count out of every single dungeon.
Barely any RP, no mini bosses, very big pulls, all very good things to say. Some downsides I see. You can tell Noob didn't tank this dungeon a lot, right? Grease Gun and the Thug Charge in the first area, and the Earth Shock from the Geomancers in the second area, all trash that you had to pull. Was like
third boss trash nasty. Was also
and you would just skip an entire area, which I don't know. To me, like honestly. Back then in BFA, I disliked that a lot more than I do now. Now I'm just kind of like neutral about it because at least you can skip it, right? Whereas nowadays it's like you just have to do like think about theater, like you just literally do almost every wing of every trash, right? And like you skip a couple mini bosses in the play area.
It's just a matter of like if you just pull off it.
So like what would it is happen? Like imagine having to pull all of the Motherload area. That was just part of the thing. Like I think one thing that a lot of people who don't like Motherload, now I don't know how we rank this, but the affixes in Motherload specifically, like Necrotic, Sanguine, Bolstering, a lot of those affixes have gotten significantly nerfed. And I think if we brought Motherload back with the new affixes, I think it would be huge pog. I'm a big fan of Motherload. I have like I don't know.
Same.
I think this is one of the better dungeons for sure.
This is
For
A
me-
at the worst
for me,
sure.
yeah, for me it's a hard A. I highly enjoyed this dungeon, but I do recognize it has a lot of flaws.
All right, I'm
And it's
just
hard
gonna
to
I'm gonna
say.
do this. I'm just gonna do this right here. What do you guys think?
Just
Top
put
of
it
A,
in
sure. Yeah, I think
Above
I think
Atal'Dazar,
high A.
above halls, above court. This is gonna make some people mad right now, but I think it goes
A.
here.
Oh, okay. I mean, I just feel like objectively there are a lot of issues that could bring it down to C, but I love this dungeon. I just think it has way too many fun parts. Like there are actually so many fun parts about Motherload. I also love the whole mechanic of the guy going into robot. So you can choose to either just fight him by itself, or like stop the cast, or you have him go into robot and give you 16 count instead.
Yep. And like you gotta tag
Like,
them
I
and
thought that was
stuff,
cool as
and like
hell.
you
Yeah.
could ring them and make them go to different robots. Like you could grip or whatever. Remember, you'd grip it by the door, and like it would run inside to that robot that was in the middle. That was hella cool.
Yeah. I mean, this dungeon was just played so many different ways. Like, remember how at the end of the expansion too, people started to fight all the stuff after third boss. You would fight like all those big robots that shoot people.
Let your mage
And,
take
Mhm.
spell
Yeah,
steal.
yeah, and your major
100%
skills
stuff.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Like,
see, that's
there
one
were
of
just
the
so many
things
different ways
that
to play
is
this dungeon.
crazy is we talk about areas that are unpullable, but then there's so many times where all of a sudden people start playing them. Okay, the last area of Motherload is an exception because those specifically got nerfed near the end of the expansion. But even then, though,
did
like
they? I actually don't remember them getting nerfed.
yes,
Oh,
that
they
was a
did.
thing that they
They
changed.
got Giga nerfed.
Yeah, I don't know if they got Giga nerfed, but they definitely made it more reasonable. Because before, literally, what you would do is you would have 100% count on the second boss, and then you
I
would
figured
just
that's just because
yeah.
people didn't know to fight the stuff. later
Yeah,
on.
well, people still weren't fighting it right away after the nerfs. Like people definitely experimented and started to realize and started to pull more there. All right, we
It
have
was a fun dungeon.
our so far the 3 highest dungeons right now are BFA dungeons. We still have a lot more to go.
Oh yeah,
but-
easy.
And here we're gonna have a Legion contender here. I have a feeling the chat's gonna be pretty
Ooh.
happy about this one. The Maw of Souls.
Soul.
This is a dungeon that
banger.
I've never done before in my life, but it is the most talked about dungeon. All right,
Okay,
I'll put up a
this is the
poll. So just talk about
So-
what you think is good in the chat, and then vote with the poll.
This is the only sub 30-minute dungeon to ever
Yep.
exist. It's a 24-minute.
24 minutes was the timer.
Yeah, it's a hard banger.
It was, I mean, okay. There are so many positives to this dungeon that you could list, and there are negatives too, which I'll go over in a sec.
There's
but
some
like,
big negatives too.
3 boss dungeon. The first boss is pretty nothing. There really wasn't a lot that happened. That's why you pulled trash with it, so it wasn't that bad. But second boss, pretty insane difficulty curve. You had to kill ads, or the person that was targeted by the boss would die. So there was a difficulty curve. Dodging frontals was hard. The room kind of got a little crazy. But the third boss was a pretty cool boss. Probably one of the biggest like oh shit moments in terms of dungeon design that I've seen, in a while. That was a fun boss. The trash, aside from the lantern bearers, I don't think there was like too much that was really.
Not gonna lie, I don't remember what the stuff in the beginning did. It was just all AoE down hard.
It didn't do anything. There was nothing that it did. I think there was a cast that you had to stun at some point. I don't remember what the name of the cast was. I think it was like a 50% stun. Also, they would like randomly like do frontals and move away, so you wanted to AoE grip them to make sure that they didn't get away, so you could AoE them down faster. I guess harpooners were kind of scary, but yeah, the trash in this dungeon was pretty. It pretty much did nothing. The hardest
Except
trash
for the
in the
stuff
dungeon.
after second boss. After second boss, that shit was brutal.
Oh, I was gonna say the hardest part of this dungeon was probably
The boat.
inside the boat, because you were cramped corridors. You had to dodge stuff on the ground. That was
Well,
really
okay,
hard to see.
so
Like,
it wasn't.
tiny
It wasn't
barrels.
like it was hard in a different way, right? It was just like hard in like you were sort of fucked in what you can see and stuff, and
Yeah.
that's a lot of stuff to avoid.
I'm seeing a lot of like negatives. Like not like
Well,
everyone likes
this is
it
one
as
of those
short
dungeons where
dungeons.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
negatives, but there's a lot of positives. Like it's had hard positives, like dungeon left being arguably the biggest one. And
So
also,
that's-
like, yeah, if you were playing a tank, you just got absolutely crushed by everything. Like this is one of the dungeons where you had to actually tank. Like you couldn't just.
Yeah.
I mean, there were people who were kiting it at the end of Legion. You would have to like literally run around all over the place, and like cleaving was awful. But I don't know. It's really hard to say.
I will say that nothing that was negative about this dungeon really felt unfair. Everything just like if you died to something, it was because you played poorly. There was nothing. There was no like BS in this dungeon.
Yeah, this was not a cheesy dungeon for sure.
Yeah, because it was so short, like it didn't really feel like you were too invested. I guess that's not the right way to say it, but I guess it gets the point across. It was just a very quick dungeon. I think it has so many upsides. I don't know if I like putting it S tier though. I think it's just a high A. It was a really hard dungeon is the thing because it was so short. Too.
Yeah.
Well, what do you guys think for a second? I just want to point out that think about, and by you guys think about, I mean the Blizzard devs need to think about how much more forgiving people are of things that are like tough or abusive or bad if you can go through the dungeon fast and do big pulls. Like if you can go like here's an example like okay, Ruby Life pools or whatever in Dragonflight, like that's a dungeon where it's like almost at a bare minimum is going to be a B, just because like like you're going to go through it fast, there's going to be big pulls, like there might be some problems, like it might be a little linear, but it could be like an omega banger S tier, and then at worst it's probably going to be like a B tier. Like go through it fast, big pulls, like I don't know, but anyway. You guys got to tell me where to put this because I've never done it in my life. I think
it's minimum A. I would be tempted to put an S too. Like I would be fine having this dungeon every single expansion just because it's so short. But I don't know.
Okay, so here's my thoughts on this as a key push like player, right? If I were just somebody that did my weekly 15s and I saw this being in the pool, easy S tier, like no thoughts whatsoever. But as a key push dungeon, this was one of the hardest.
You don't want to push it. Yeah, like this was like one of the lowest.
This was actually probably the hardest one to push.
It's because you couldn't cheese this dungeon.
You couldn't cheese it.
Yeah.
On Tyrannical, this 24-minute long dungeon, 15 of those minutes were on bosses, even though it was a 3-boss dungeon. Hellia could easily end up being like an 8-minute boss fight on the high Tyrannical keys, and that's a third of your dungeon. So, I think high A tier for me.
I'm okay for that.
Put it somewhere.
Better or worse than
Motherload?
Better. Okay.
Yeah.
Cannot put it on the level of Freehold just because of some of the problems. It had.
Well, Freehold was just more fun because there was just like a shit ton of trash that you would just.
Well, I think Freehold. It sounds
and it was very simple.
Just from listening and also reading the chat, it did feel like there were a lot more downsides to Maw of Souls. Like in Freehold,
it is challenging.
There's not that many things you could complain about in Freehold. Like I sort of had some things to say about the bosses, but that is even more from a healer perspective. Like from a DPS perspective, any of them are like still probably fine. Like maybe you could complain about the harpooners, but like even that, right? Like there's not that much to complain about in Freehold, but in Maw I saw a lot of different stuff. So I think A tier seems fair. All right, another dungeon that I don't really know anything about, Nelth's Lair. I think this one was brought back in Time Walking, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think I maybe did it like once or twice. What do you guys think about Nelth's Lair?
This dungeon was the hardest key to push on Fortified, based off of the timer. This was a very, very tight timer dungeon. Halls of Valor might have had like the harder like healing and DPS, like the living checks, but Nelth's Lair, even if you played the dungeon perfectly, if there were any slight mistakes anywhere throughout the dungeon, you just wouldn't time it. It was that tight of a timer. Like it was really, really hard to get a 27 Fortified of this key back in the day, and that was for people who had 27s and 28s done for every other key.
It was also heavily cheesed.
It was cheesed, yeah. The bosses were the bosses I think were kind of innovative for the time. Like I feel really bad about the time walking version of this dungeon because like the time walking version of this dungeon like doesn't do the old dungeon justice. Like for some reason on the first boss they make these little bugs spawn like 3 times faster than they spawned back in the day. Like,
it's really weird.
It's so weird. Like that first boss wasn't nearly as brutal as it is now. In the time walking version, I think it was a lot more fair back then. Like you had time to swap to the bugs. You just kind of had to know, okay, the boss is going to stomp in the next 5 seconds. I need to be ready to swap to this bug when it spawns so we don't all get one shot. It wasn't like 3 of them were spawning every 5 seconds. Cup boss, everyone just cheesed with a weak aura. That wasn't really anything special. Worm boss, that was actually kind of a tough boss, right? Killing the ads before they got to the boss and empowered him was pretty tough to do efficiently, and also make sure your tank could just stay alive. There was a lot of tank damage on that boss too. And then of course the last boss was just trying to kill the boss before this hard break point at the 4th minute of the fight, where the boss would slam when you didn't have any pillars up. It was pretty dangerous.
It was a pretty cool boss though.
It was a cool boss, cool concept. The trash was brutal in this dungeon though. You had to kite it. I don't think it would work nowadays.
It was also a very linear dungeon, but there were somewhat of options. There were definitely stuff you would skip here and there. It's not necessarily the worst thing ever. I think the thing that really holds it back is the dungeon just gets cheesed way too hard. There's nothing really too strong about it. I would almost even put in D, to be honest. What do you think?
I don't think that I would never want to see it come back. I think that I wouldn't be particularly happy for it to come back.
Chat's putting a lot of Bs. I saw a lot of Bs from chat. Is this a high key take?
I think it's between B and C for me.
I would feel it's even, I don't know. I'll put it in a C probably. I feel even in the mid-level key, it's pretty rough. It's certainly not as bad as Halls of Valor.
Better or worse than King's Rest?
That's a hard one.
It's really close, I think.
Chat says better. We'll give chat one option. Yeah, chat wants it higher. You guys are I believe you guys, but all right, finally we're getting into some dungeons that I can talk about again.
Holy. The
next dungeon, the Necrotic Wake. This dungeon has been through a lot of different iterations. But let's talk mostly about the current iteration, because they've changed the weapons. Originally, the weapons would go away if you would die, and so I was scared to death to pick up the weapons because I would just be dead, and then I'd lose a spear for my team. Eventually, they fixed that. They've changed. They target cap the weapons. I don't know. Chat is all over the place on this one. Let me put up a poll.
Well, just say why you guys enjoy this dungeon. You guys just can't just say S and just leave an S. You guys have to say what is good about the dungeon.
I think if you were to poll this would be the most divisive poll we've had. I think I could see anyone having opinions all over the spectrum here.
I think the weapons are too impactful. I think a lot of the polls that you do are pretty big and fun though. The first pull that you do is cool. You do stuff with boss. Yeah, you have the orbs, but your damage on the boss is still meaningful, and it's still a big pull that you're blasting. The pull with Narzuda, if you do that, is usually pretty big. Even before that, you're doing some pretty big pulls the whole way, all the way up until you get in the gauntlet.
The problem with the big pulls is that none of them are actually meaningful. You don't really do anything in the big pulls. You just kill it all in with an item, and then you don't actually do any mechanics. You don't actually do any damage yourself. From what I've gathered, everyone just says, "Oh, I like it because it's easy."
Yeah, that's kind of what the people want. The people do want easy, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not. They just want fun to play. People are it's not fun, but it's easy. I don't want this dungeon. This dungeon's awful.
People want one thing, and it's disgusting, dude.
Yeah, it's worse than Junkyard for sure.
I agree.
Well, I think we should remember the context of this, right? Is 2 years from now, because they're not going to bring back Shadowlands Dungeons next expansion, right? Because they already said that. So the expansion after Shadowlands, after Dragonflight, think about whether or not you'd want this dungeon to come back. I don't know how I'm going to feel 2 years from now about this dungeon.
It has slight replayability, just because it's sort of chill. It gives me Mist vibes, but I think it's just it's just not a good dungeon. Also, it has way too many problems. The last two bosses in particular are some of the worst bosses in this game. Yeah. I think those last two bosses are D tier. But
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of anyone who enjoys those last two boss, right? Like, it's literally not fun at all.
I think the only
It's
good
literally
boss is
awful.
second boss. I enjoy second boss. I think
Yeah,
that's
second
a
boss
good
is
fight.
fine.
Is Discord dying or is it me dying?
You.
That's probably me.
I would put it in C at best.
Yeah, I'm looking around where I would put it here. C is such like a minefield where I'm just like looking at it. I'm just like thinking about how
Yeah,
much
I
I
mean,
would
these are
want
just the
these
bad dungeons.
dungeons to come back,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, do I want DOS? Do I want
Yeah, C
King's
is just
Rest?
where it's like,
do I
we don't
want
want
Lake?
it, but it's not the worst thing in the world.
I think like dead center of C is probably.
That's kind of where I was thinking too. Chat loves Darkheart Thicket. I feel like DOS definitely has more redeeming qualities than it. I don't know if I'd rather have King's Rest come back. I feel like now I definitely would rather play King's Rest, but in 2 years I feel like I'd probably be. I think
I
this
guess
is
ahead of Lair, maybe.
okay. Yeah, this is about where I'd put it. I think there's again a few redeeming qualities, but not enough to make it a good dungeon. All right, speaking of a few redeeming qualities, but not enough to make it a good dungeon, next is Plaguefall. Plaguefall for a while. Let's only talk about the current iteration of Plaguefall. It
I
went
remember when you said it
through.
was B.
I did say it was B.
When it was the worst thing ever.
in
When it was
Outlook.
way worse than that.
Okay, so the context of that is in alpha they were iterating on the dungeons and
It
making
wasn't
changes.
even alpha, it was like late beta.
Okay, beta, whatever. And in beta, they were making changes and they were doing a lot of really wild stuff to it. And I don't know, I thought the last boss was cool. I still think the last boss is cool. I think the first boss was cool, but now everyone just cheeses it. All right, I'll put up a poll so that people can just put the letter in the poll and then talk about what they think about it. I think there's going to be very few people that put this dungeon in the S tier. A lot less than Wake, although maybe not. I don't know.
I personally feel like Plaguefall had a lot of comebacks. Like after playing Plaguefall this patch, I don't think Plaguefall is as bad as it used to be.
This is wild.
So I think like the fun
It might be close
I think
to
the fun
B tier.
parts is the slime is actually fun. Like it's fun having the slime buff.
I love
Like,
the
I
red
think
slime.
I love that buff. It's actually really fun.
Yep.
Like having more haste. Like I think that alone is just so much better than Necrotic Wake. I think
Great
Last Boss
mechanic.
also great boss. Like people hate Last Boss because it's really challenging, but it's actually like a good boss aside from the challenge. The rest of the bosses were whatever. Like first boss is whatever. It's just a fucking punching bag. Second boss is also sort of whatever. It was just annoying. I bet Pugs hated it because he had to CC a slime. Third boss was like, okay. I think the way you routed that dungeon too, there were so many different ways you can play that dungeon. Like you can fight the slough in the beginning, you can fight the blobs, and that one big dude. I don't know, there's just so many different ways you can play Plaguefall. The only like real bad thing about this dungeon is disease. Like tanks were literally unable to play without a disease dispel. I would be okay to put it in a B. Like I'm pretty neutral with this dungeon now.
I think B
I'm very
tier
neutral with this
is,
dungeon now.
It's a very neutral dungeon. Yeah, I agree.
I think the bosses are okay. Nothing special, but also like nothing egregious. I think this dungeon's okay. The only thing, I don't know. It's okay. It's like a very mid dungeon. It's hard to say because I don't know if I'm really gonna miss this dungeon, but I don't really hate it. This is like I think the definition of like the bottom of the B tier.
I used to hate this dungeon a lot. It used to be like a straight fucking low C or D to me, but I think it's redeemed a lot of.
I almost feel like Plaguefall for me is like what a stock standard Mythic Plus dungeon should be built from. Like this is the baseline of what I think is okay for a Mythic Plus dungeon.
Yeah.
I am just okay with this dungeon. I don't think it does anything spectacular. I don't think it does anything really wrong. It's just there.
Yep. I think it's not really redeeming qualities, but just like things to talk about. Very, very wide open. You always have tons of room to fight, like almost always, unless you're like trying to navigate around mushrooms or something. Like you never have camera problems. The pull size I think is like, you know, pretty reasonable. Like you're pulling lots of stuff. None of the bosses are like super abusive. Like nothing is like, oh man, this is a really well, I guess the red slime too. I don't know. This is
I like the red slime. Red
yeah,
slime
I think
they need more mechanics like that.
Going back to my initial prediction, in the beta, Plaguefall is in the B tier.
Yeah, after a lot of help.
Look, I saw their vision. Okay, I saw their vision. What can I say? All right, this is the one where chat's gonna be mad, but it doesn't matter. This is why you guys are in the chat, and I'm the cat with the waffle on the head. Sanguine Depths. I'm gonna put a poll up. I think the chat knows me and Dorki's take on Sanguine. What does Xyro think about Sanguine?
Oh, I'm with you guys 100% in the way. This is the best dungeon of the expansion, and it's not even close.
Ooh.
But they're gonna be mad and probably put it all in like C tier.
Yeah, so I mean, I can see why people don't like it. It's a complicated dungeon. There are a lot of stomps, a lot of kicks. It's very punishing. The bosses are brutally hard. It's very snowbally with the buff. But it's got so many good things going for it. It's got big pulls. It's got good bosses. I think every single boss is good and fair. I do think third boss is a little bit RNG. If third boss was able to spawn orbs in like set locations, say there's like, you know, always 4 on this side, always 4 on this side, always 4 on that side, it'd be so much better. The way you route this dungeon too changes drastically. One thing Xyro said is if this dungeon was an open dungeon and like, you know, you didn't have like tight corridors, this would easily be an S tier. Like,
oh yeah, close. If this was that in my opinion is one of the only downsides of the dungeon is the closed corridors.
Yeah, just imagine this but outside.
Yeah, it's a great challenge though. I think this dungeon has a lot of good things going for it. It's also like the best whatchamacallit Covenant buff thingy.
Covenant mechanic.
Covenant cheese, yeah.
Yep.
It has
I
the best
agree with that.
Covenant mechanic.
Like by far too. I think by far. Like there's the red slime is like kind of cool, but it's like so infrequent in the dungeon. But there's like a lot of urns and you can like stack them and chain them and stuff. I don't know. This is, I think because of the closed corridors and the camera, personally that hasn't bothered me that much, but I could understand. I don't think it's fair to put it next to Freehold, but I'm putting it in high A.
Yeah, I think this is
I would put it
dungeon
next to Motherload.
Yeah. I was thinking it's not Maw, but it's right below it, in my opinion. I think it's above Motherload.
Above Motherload.
Yeah.
If they also just ended the dungeon on the third boss, that would like make it an S tier too.
Yeah, that would also make it really, really good. I feel like the gauntlet is really, really rough. Oh yeah, the bats too. I really love the bats in this dungeon.
The bats
really
are
big
so
fan
cool.
of the bats.
Yeah, bats are
yeah,
great.
the bats, yeah.
Big bat fan.
Bats are good friends.
Do you also like the trash count in this dungeon and like somehow that one guy in that one small room before the second boss circle just sometimes doesn't pull?
Stuff.
That's a good one too.
That's good stuff. Good dungeon.
The chat might be mad there, but the chat vote was actually A. The A was the favorites, so that's
they're biased.
But there was a lot of D's. There was a lot of D's.
There was like no B or C's. It was all S, A, or D.
Yeah. I mean, that's generally how that dungeon goes. Yeah.
But I would assume that a lot of the people that voted D on Sanguine were also the people that voted S and A on Necrotic Wake. Those are the people that just want
easy dungeons. They just don't like my pug experience is awful, therefore it's D.
Yep. They're just looking at like what dungeons do they have the most fun runs and pugs in. All right, everyone's saying no. Let's move on before they can voice their opinion because it's wrong. The next dungeon, this is an interesting one because this is one of the few like I would call healer dungeons. Temple of Sethraliss. What does the chat think about Temple of Sethraliss from BFA? And before you guys mute the healer take, what does the chat think about Temple of Seth? Hold on, let me put up a poll.
I actually have no idea how I should feel about Temple.
I think, okay, so for me, it's a little weird. MDI bias. This dungeon caused so many problems for me that I just.
I mean, you didn't even get to
bias
see it
towards
MDI.
Well, we did for season 1, and then we had just had to disable it because it broke so many times. So I just hate this dungeon. I don't think I can provide like a
Ooh.
fair, unbiased thought
That's
here.
fine.
Ooh, everyone's all over the place with the votes. The votes are crazy. Get in there.
Yeah, it's hard.
Well, all right, I'll talk as a
I don't know
healer.
how I feel.
I think the bosses were cool, and I think especially after playing through Shadowlands with no like rot fight challenging HPS bosses, it definitely makes me miss this dungeon. But man, did this dungeon have some problems in it. There was the mandatory poison dispel that a lot of people didn't notice because druids and paladins were meta.
Yeah,
but
that
if you
was
were to
bad,
if you
dude.
were to take a priest into temple, like the second boss room,
Yeah.
I think the second boss room was cool but also very challenging. There was also like some really hard to see frontals, like the guys that rode on the, I don't remember what they were called, but the guys that rode, you know what
they
I'm
kept
talking
turning
about, right?
the fucking cars.
Yeah,
the cars.
they were really big mobs, and they would do like a cleave, but it wouldn't have any animation. Like it was
they would
just
just
you
like turn
couldn't
around
revive the
randomly and just
tank.
like swipe your team.
There was the guys that were in stealth that would patrol around, sometimes really, really long patrols, and they would stun you when they come out of stealth. The guys on Fortified outside of Galvast were really, really nasty. This
also very
dungeon had a
linear.
lot of problems. And also, on top of that, this was a mandatory skip dungeon where if you go in a straight line, it was like you were just over count. Also, I think the third boss was, or the last boss was not really that good. A lot of people are like, oh, last boss, healer boss, Pog, but I think the third boss and the first boss were good. The last boss was kind of whatever. I think I would probably, like, I think this has enough problems that I think I might have to put it in the C tier, but I'm putting it probably like pretty high up.
What's pretty high up, like A?
No, in the C tier, but like ahead of almost.
Oh, you
everything
mean like a
there.
high C?
Yeah, like probably like the top of the C tier. There's definitely days
I'm
when
pretty okay with that too.
I think there were just too many problems with this dungeon. I think like if you look at the dungeons in B tier, like there weren't really that many problems with like Workshop, Plaguefall. Like they were just like kind of mid dungeons. This dungeon was like had some cool parts, but also had a lot of really negative parts to it.
This was definitely a rogue dungeon too. Like you needed the skips. There were so many skips. Like the beginning of the room, you would have to skip. After the first boss, you need to skip. After second boss, you need to skip. After last boss, you need to skip. I mean, like skipping to the last boss. Yeah, this dungeon had a lot of skips. I think C is fair. Somewhere in Z.
What do you think, Xyro? Top of C tier?
I'm gonna defer to you guys for this one. Like again, I'm
Xyro's just mad at this dungeon.
I personally like it more than Darkheart, so I would say yes.
Yeah, I think this is fair. There were definitely some cool parts. I don't know. This was a polarizing dungeon, but this is one where I think like seeing this appear for one season in the mix would be cool, but this is not one that I'd be like, yo, keep bringing it back. Like, yo, we got to get Temple again, you know? Like this is one where like, yo, Temple, like that's cool. This is a throwback. Like so the same sort of way that I might feel about King's Rest or Wake or DOS, where it had some cool parts to it, but not one where I'd want to play for more than one more season.
Yeah.
I saw someone in chat was asking what specifically broke about this dungeon. The main thing that broke here
The orb, right?
was
The
the
orb,
orbs.
yeah.
So for those of you who never played this dungeon, this had a pretty interesting and unique idea where there was like this giant snake head in the middle of the dungeon, like after
That
the
was an
third
eyeball.
boss, before the fourth boss. And there were little dudes that patrolled around this room that held like little orbs that you were supposed to fill the snake head with 2 eyeballs so that it would open the head and you could move on in the dungeon. Yeah, those orbs just sometimes disappeared and they would never come back. And that made the dungeon uncompletable.
I'm going to have a hot take here. I'm interested to hear Dorki's opinion. We did this dungeon many, many times with many, many good players that did this orb room very fast. And that basically never happened. And I think all of the times that it happened in MDI was on purpose.
It actually happened a lot in M0 and early season, so it might just be that people didn't really know what to do yet. Like I remember one of my first times trying to do this shit in M0. I couldn't complete it.
Huh. Okay.
That's where we run
I
this
like
dungeon.
almost don't remember a single time when that happened.
I would agree with
I
what
think
you
it's
said,
just like it just happens.
but it also happened to teams who were in the league. So,
Yeah, like it just happens. I don't really know why.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, obviously, like towards the end, everyone had their set paths, and everyone knew exactly what to do.
Because it happened when you threw it on the air, like on the lanterns or whatever, right?
Something
it would
like
get
that,
caught
yeah.
in the air.
Yeah.
Like it was easily replicatable, is what I replicatable. Yeah. All right. So this was a dungeon where, when we started this tier list, someone messaged me and they said, "quote Please put Siege in S tier." I think this is a hot
Why?
take. Then this person is serious too. This is a serious person. Okay, he just outed himself in the chat. It was Nubidin.
It's an alliance player.
It's an alliance player. Nubidin says put it in S tier. He outed himself in the chat. Everyone's hugging him. I'm putting up a poll right now. Dorki, what do you think about Siege?
I mean, it's probably gonna be a D just because it has too many problems. Especially the alliance issue was like the weirdest and the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Like this is the only dungeon where alliance was negatively affected. But I don't know. I mean, I personally don't feel it's a D, but I think it's just a D. Because like there are stuff I enjoyed about this dungeon. Like I enjoyed the execution. I enjoyed having to deal with affixes in this dungeon. Like it just felt like a good challenge. It was a high execution dungeon. It was one of those things where if your group sucked ass, it was miserable. But I enjoyed tanking this dungeon.
There were a lot of like pretty big pulls, right? Like you start off the dungeon and you like pull.
Well,
all
it's
the
not
shit
even
at the
big pulls, to
beginning.
be honest. Like nobody really cares about the pulls. It's all about execution in the end, right?
Yeah.
Like you remember how I don't know. I mean, it was just one of those things. Like whenever you would play with Trance, this dungeon would go so smooth because it was all about execution.
Yeah, Trance was
like,
the god
being
of
able to do
Siege.
stuff. Yeah,
I
but
remember that.
yeah, I think it just has to be a D.
I also really hate the last boss in this dungeon.
The last boss in this dungeon was so bad.
Second boss was really bad too.
The way the tentacles worked, the way that the second platform worked, the fact that you pretty much had to one phase second platform or you just got fucked. It was so bad. I think at the best this is a low C dungeon for me. But I think
we just default to D.
You think it's a D?
We just need to fix this dungeon. Yeah, it has hard issues.
Poor Nubidin, man. I mean, I think there's not that much to say, man. Like, there were like, dude, all those little like cutter guys that would like fervent and just like one shot DPS. There was so many like poorly telegraphed frontals in this dungeon.
All is unplayable.
All of the bosses were so brutal. Like second boss would scale so nasty with like with Tyrannical or whatever, because you have to just like phase it so many times.
Yeah.
The fact that this key was really only pushable during bolstering week so you could cheese it was like, I think that's pretty telling as to how bad of a dungeon it was.
Yeah. This was not my favorite dungeon. Speaking of not my favorite dungeon, we're filling up the low tiers. We have Spires of Ascension.
It's the worst dungeon in existence. Is there anyone who doesn't think it's a D? And you guys can comment on what you like about it.
Yeah, let's hear anyone.
Whoever has a higher than D opinion on Spires.
I'm gonna put up a poll. If you have an opinion higher than C tier, post some positive things. Post some positive things about Spires.
Grau, could you do me a favor? Can you click on the cogwheel on the right there and add a tier just for Spires?
Oh, jeez, just for Spires.
There's actually one. No, just keep it a D. There's actually one opinion that I can agree on, and there's only one. It's second boss was actually good before the nerf. Like the same way I enjoy the
third boss
workshop boss.
Yeah.
Like I think it's actually good that like you have to like actively dodge the boss and shit. Like people don't like it because they suck and they get hit by it all the time, and there's like, oh, how can I deal with this? This is bullshit. But it's actually like it's a good thing, like having to do stuff in that fight instead of just hit the boss and heal the bleed. I mean, why is it a bad thing? People would only say it's bad because it's too hard.
I mean, that boss got turned into not a boss with the nerf
Yeah.
plus
The only thing I would
effect.
say is, as a healer, like, okay, as a DPS, you have the option to, like, greed or not greed and, like, do damage or not do damage and, like, try and plan your globals. But as a healer, like, okay, if you don't... Like,
No, there's no option. You always greed.
well,
That's the real
and,
deal.
like, as a
Mindset.
healer, people just die, right? Like, if the orbs are such that I just have to move a lot and I can't finish a cast, like, because of how much damage the bleed does, they just die. And it's not a matter of, like, it happens so fast that, I don't know, I feel like as a DPS, I understand why you might say, like, oh, it was more challenging and more interesting when there was more orbs. But as a healer, you like, someone just dies. Like, there's nothing you can do. Like, when you're playing a class like Shaman, where you have no, like, you know, you can't, like, you know, use any big instant cast heals, like you have a Spirit Walkers and that's it, and then you can't cast while moving at all. Like, I don't know.
Well, you just have to
like,
plan defensives better when you can't
I mean,
cast.
yeah, and then some guy gets the bleed 3 times in a row, and I mean, like, it just, I don't know, it just doesn't really work like that. Like, it just happens so fast where, like, some guy is at half health and then you start channeling, like, you're casting and then you have to move and then he's dead. Like, it's just like pressing a defensive when a guy's at 20% health, like, isn't really...
I remember watching you guys do I think it was a 30 Spires last week, like Tyrannical week with the easy affixes. I remember Muchas got the bleed once, and you're like, I got you, and you're spamming heal into him. Don't even have to move.
Yeah, right?
And he still just dies. 'Cause
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly. Like, you literally, every single global needs to go into him or they die in a high bleed. Yeah,
But that's not an issue of the dodging, if anything. Like, if anything, they just nerf the bleed and they keep the
well,
dodging.
okay,
thing.
well, yeah,
how about
they nerf the dodging instead of the bleed. I mean, yeah, they need to nerf one of them, right? Like, I don't know.
Because, I mean, like, what Xyro was saying was that, like, you couldn't even heal it without the dodging, so...
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it has anything to do with the dodging.
Well, okay. Either way, like, in the state that it was, I did not like it as a healer. But we don't need to defend Spires.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks anyways.
All right, I think this is gonna be another divisive one.
Wait, did we actually manage to talk about Spires without talking about how shit the fact that you have to spend like 3.5 minutes in RP?
Oh yeah, we can talk about Spires.
Yeah, okay, we gotta talk about how
God,
shit
fuck
Spires is a little bit more.
All right, so chain casting Dark Lash, I think that's the very first issue. Like, there's no mobs that should just chain cast nonstop, and there's like 2 of them, and there's a caster, and there's like a healer, and there's a Goliath that needs 2 kicks. Like, it's actually insane. The RP, the angel flying, that was also awful. I think the first boss fucking sucks. The trees like in the way, having to drag the boss, and like, you know, dealing with the line. It just hits way too hard. Also, like, it was just too gimmicky sometimes, where people would just get clipped by orbs while running towards the bird. And like, just having the guy fly around the entire time was just awful. The little birds melee way too fast. The spear throwing dudes, those mobs were awful. Like, nobody
I don't
likes
know
that type of mobs.
what it is, like why Blizzard decided to start doing this expansion, but these minus AoE damage auras, no. Don't ever do that again.
They're trying to make single target. Dude, this is literally the make single target better again dungeon.
Dude, that's what I've been saying for the longest time. Remember I said that?
Yeah, no,
like,
it is.
I kept saying that. Like, they keep pushing for people to play smaller. They want people to CC mobs and pull that fucking squad leader by itself.
Yep, that's literally what they want.
Do people even know what's on the left side? Like, does anyone ever go
because
left
in
side?
Pride,
I don't think anyone has ever went left.
People did left side in Pride. Remember, that was like
that's because they didn't know any better.
Route.
Yeah, they didn't know any better.
I mean, we went left for the longest time.
Mm.
So there's like literally no choice in what you fight. The trash was awful. The bosses were awful. Angels were awful. They were slow target dummies. Take forever to kill. Really boring. Last boss is also really boring. Like, even third boss was awful. All the trash around third boss area too was awful.
And then the angels at the end, they literally put 3 mini bosses, and they're like, how do we make it so they can't pull them together? Let's make it so they heal each other when you kill one of them, just to make it harder for people to pull it together. Like,
dude,
why?
I remember when I was doing this for the first time with you guys in beta, I could not believe it. Like,
yeah,
I could not believe everything. I could not believe the squad leader. I could not believe the fucking angels that fly in the sky. I could not believe the angels in the end. Like, I knew right away this was going to be a terrible dungeon.
Yeah, this
before
is a
it even came out.
dungeon for sure. Like, Just don't bring this one back.
And then on top of that, it just murders your frame rate too. Like it just like I don't even know what's going on in this dungeon, but absolutely terrible.
Yeah,
Corgi
absolutely
goggles
terrible dungeon.
mandatory. Night potion mandatory.
Can you imagine people did the WoW anniversary event to get corgi goggles just to hide RP mobs that are blocking your camera? Like that's got to be the one redeeming quality of this dungeon is it's like open, but it isn't. The first boss room, there's those huge trees that just get in your way when you're trying to dodge the orbs. The second boss room has those huge pillars, and people literally tank the boss in specific spots just so that you don't like get in the way of the pillars. In the last boss, you have to use corgi goggles to remove this giant angel that's just flapping, and there's all these invisible walls. Like, ugh. All right, I think that was enough Spire shit talking. Yeah, I do agree we needed a little bit more time.
Probably one of the worst Mythic Plus dungeons ever made.
This one, I think, is going to be polarizing. You know, this is a dungeon where you had a very different experience if you were pugging it, especially early on in the season, than if you were in a coordinated group. This dungeon was our nemesis for a long time. This was a very spell-reflecty dungeon, and we were just, out here grinding with a Resto Druid and a bear. Shrine of the Storm. Dorki, this was... this dungeon had a special place in your heart, so you can start here.
So... if you played it right, you could technically pull really big here. It was also... there were a lot of different trash pulls you can do. Because the account was actually really high in this dungeon. So, you can even choose to fight, like, some of this stuff over here, or skip some of that stuff, or, like, spell reflect that one dude for a ton of count. The bosses were okay, I would say. Like, the first boss was kind of whatever.
Third boss was some ass. Third boss was terrible.
Yeah, third boss was actually terrible.
Yeah.
Second boss was actually really cool. Like, I think second boss was one of the more fun bosses. And last boss was like, hit or miss. You either love it or you hate it.
Yeah, I think the big problem with the last boss is it was just long, but it was definitely like unique and
Well, also like the kick requirements were extreme.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was true actually. The kick requirements were nuts.
Yeah, the kick requirements were not ads. Yeah.
Yeah, you need a double melee or you were fucked.
I think objectively this dungeon is like a C. But I personally like it a lot. Like,
really?
To me, it's an A. But yeah, I think it just has way too many issues.
I don't know. I feel like the issues... I'll just to add to that point, there were issues, but I do think a lot of the issues had counterplay. I think
that's
there was a high kick requirement, but like, okay, well, you can just go into the dungeon and make sure you have a lot of kicks. Like, yeah,
well,
some of them
like there were a lot of kicks, but there also weren't because the kicks weren't really required.
Yeah,
like in the beginning. You could have just spell reflected the bolts, or stun them, or eat them, or line them, and then you only really have to kick the heal. And you can also purge the shield. What else is there? That's like the only kick I can really think about. Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, maybe I'll just put in like a B. Like a B is a good one for me.
I mean, at least for me personally, I don't see any dungeon in the C tier that I think comes close to as good as Shrine is. For me, Shrine definitely goes in the B tier. I definitely agree that this is a dungeon where in pugs it's frustrating, but I also think that again, like in with some of these other dungeons, like that's sort of a tuning issue. Like I think they can fix some things very easily. And then if you think about like, okay, well, the pulls are still big, like there's still lots of mobs, like most of the bosses are like pretty fair aside from like third boss on crazy high keys. It's very, very wide open. Like, I think there's a lot of other, like, I don't know. I think most of the bad parts about Shrine have counterplay. And I think that the biggest downside is just that it's like it had a lot of coordination required to, like, doing stuff. So, I don't know. I put it, I think it's in the B tier somewhere. I don't know. What do you think, Zyro?
I think it's actually pretty healthily in the B tier. I think it's better than Plaguefall. I think it's probably better than, I think I'd put it like right in the middle, like probably ahead of Eye of Azshara, because I think this dungeon's actually got some pretty good redeeming qualities to it. Like you said, the bosses are pretty fine except for a third boss. I think a lot of the count issues were fixed heading into the Awakened season, right? Because remember, the mini bosses used to be worth a lot less, and then they actually buffed up their count to make them actually playable.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I remember that.
So people are saying there are mandatory skips here. I think the only really mandatory skips were...
There's nothing wrong with mandatory skips, too. Like, it's only bad if it's, like, constant skips.
Yeah.
I don't think mandatory skips is a bad thing.
The only things like you really had to skip were like the water elementals at the start, right? And the two dudes in that room that spawned the tentacles. Like that was it. You could pull pretty much everything else. So I don't see that being too much of a problem. I think it's just a high B tier dungeon for me. Like it's just a solid dungeon.
For me, I think like me personally, how much I would like seeing it come back. I think I put it above Junkyard and Eye of Azshara. I think if I was pugging, I would probably put it below Plaguefall down here, but I like where I personally think it goes is like right here. This is where I would put it for my personal, like how much I want it to come back.
Dude, personally, I would put it ahead of Halls. I would rather play Shrine
all the way
Halls,
up there in A tier.
But I mean, that's just me.
I mean, it's a good dungeon. It's a good dungeon.
It's a fun dungeon for sure.
What did chat say about this? Did we pull this?
It's not even a tank take though, because I'm pretty sure most tanks hate this dungeon. Like I'm pretty sure tanks would put this shit in.
Well, tanks that played Prot Warrior probably didn't mind this dungeon. Brain dead ranking. The bear is wrong? Question mark. Some people based.
Hold on,
Hook
let me
take.
see.
Nubidin says no way. I love tanking Shrine. True.
This guy is also a guy who says Mist is a D tier. He also says
You just immediately look at his logs.
yeah, I mean you can just tell when someone is stupid. Like this guy is obviously brain dead. Like he says Mist is D, he says Sanguine Depths is D, he says something else was D. This was the worst dungeon in history. You guys are on drugs. You think it was a D. Like, literally everything's a D to this guy. This guy is just a fucking D.
D for Doomer.
Give him a D.
Savage. Absolute savagery.
Instead. Give him a B for the ban.
Absolute savagery. All right, well,
it
looks like
some people are stupid.
looks like it's going up here. All right, now back to dungeons that I don't know what the hell is going on. Seat.
All right, Seat of the Triumvirate. This is an interesting one because the absolute guaranteed pug take for Seat is just D tier, slam it there. This was the worst pug dungeon I think they've ever put in the game. Every single trash mob in this dungeon was like so difficult to deal with. There were invisible patrols of cats that just killed you. But I think the saving grace for this dungeon is that the boss design was really, really good. Every boss in this dungeon was challenging in like a healthy way.
Yeah, they were good bosses.
They were really, really good bosses. I think there's actually a lot of positives here. I think
Dude, look at the poll. Look at the poll in the chat.
So
yeah, I told
here's
you.
The thing. I think the only reason why people put in D is because it was hard and it wasn't like any other Legion dungeon. Like I think Seat was the predecessor of Shadowlands.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like if we brought Seed into Shadowlands, people would be like, "Oh, it's a pretty decent dungeon," but because it was out during Legion, it was just like a different time.
Again,
I don't think it was that bad of a dungeon.
I think also you have to realize that this was the last dungeon that they added into the expansion, so it had the least playtime and the least amount of time for people to figure out how to play the dungeon. So if you were somebody that played that last patch of Mythic Plus and you only played like the first 2 months, you didn't play the key when people had figured out how to do the key. Near the end of the season, this key was very figured out and a lot less difficult than it was at the start. People figured out how to do big damage on the last boss to make it last like 2 minutes shorter. Like this was a very timeable and relatively normal key. I think all these D takes are just people that never really got to play it when it was figured out. I think this is actually a really, really good dungeon. Like this is it's actually A tier dungeon for me.
To me, it's a really good. It's a dungeon. It's Spires designed way better. Like I think you would have liked this dungeon a lot, Grau. Like there was actually some really intense healing. The bosses were actually really cool. Second boss was literally first boss of Spires, but done better. So basically, there's like a cat that jumps around and will do like a little frontal, like exactly same as the bird in first boss of Spires. You just have to like drag it around. You have to like avoid the traps and stuff. First boss was like a major burn boss. Like, what's the equivalent of the first boss? First boss would be like third boss of Spires, I guess, or first boss of Mist, except way better. There was like a decent bit of RP in this dungeon. and there was a lot of trash pulls. Yeah, like it's actually a fun dungeon. It's just that it came out in the wrong time. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, like for me,
I'm gonna let you guys put it where you think.
It was also just overtuned.
The chat is overwhelmingly D right now.
I think this is really similar, like Cathedral, and the fact that it was released extremely overtuned, and people still have memories of it being extremely overtuned when it was released, but it got tuned down a little bit, and then people figured out how to do a little more damage on it. So, just for example, the last boss had 2 damage amps on them that were like less than 2 minutes apart, so it was really hard to make full use of those damage amps. But once people figured out they could play, double touch of Death Gloves on the Windwalker Monk, they would do like 15% more of the boss's HP, and that would reduce the boss length by like 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. That last boss was like a really, really tough, time check for a lot of teams because it was just a long boss. And once people figured out how to do that, it made the dungeon a lot more doable. I think the worst part of this dungeon, and I think this is pretty non-negotiable, I don't think anybody will disagree with me here. The worst part of this dungeon was the fact that the void portal spawns in between first and second boss could make or break the key for you. You could get a void portal spawn like all the way in the back left, which would force you to pull 2 extra trash packs that you would never want to pull anyways, and it would fuck up your entire route. That's the one thing keeping this from being like a high A tier dungeon for me. I think this is just a low A tier dungeon for me.
You guys are not going to make the chat happy.
Well, who cares about them?
Well, they didn't like Sanguine Depths.
It's about the objective.
True. Hey, all right, you convinced me. They didn't like Sanguine Depths, but actually, Sanguine Depths was voted in the A tier.
Well, I mean, that's because they're brainwashed.
True.
We gaslit them into saying Sanguine Depths is good.
All right. Zyro says low A. What do you think?
I don't know.
Dorki's a man of the people, so he's going to say B, but he likes the dungeon too.
I think A feels a little bit too high for it. If they fix the small issues, I think it would easily be an A, possibly even an S.
Possibly in the S.
Oh. I would be okay with
if
this
they fix
being
the small issues
around Shrine and B tier.
Okay,
that's a fair compromise.
Yeah.
All right, and they wanted it up here. All right, this one, everyone get ready to mute the healer take.
Yeah, now this one's a hot one, dude.
Everyone get ready to mute the healer take. Atal'Dazar. I'll start off with talking about the positives and negatives in my opinion. Hold on, actually, let me. So here, the thing about Atal'Dazar is everyone remembers this dungeon because if you're in a pug, people are dumb and they try to do this Z-axis thing where you keep going up the jail or whatever to the top of the tower, but everyone would constantly pull stuff through walls and through the Z-axis, and you just completely deplete your key. And I agree that was definitely a downside, and that was a frustrating part of the dungeon. But I will say, the area before the first boss was one of or the coolest pull in BFA, with so many mobs and actually a lot of stuff that you had to worry about, but at the same time we were pulling the turtles and stuff. I think the first boss was a really, really cool dungeon. It was like a healer check, but at the same time you could still do a lot as a DPS. It was fair. I think the second boss was not great. The third boss was kind of whatever. The fourth boss, I think, also was a really cool healing check. Probably wasn't as fun for DPS as it was for healers, but I enjoyed the last boss as well. I think you could do a lot of pretty decently sized pulls if you were playing in a group that wasn't dumb. I think the routing with when you do the rogue stuff and moving around wasn't that bad. So I think everyone hates this dungeon, but I certainly hated a whole lot less than.
What would you say it is?
Oh, geez, put me on the spot already. I think, this one's hard because I think the upsides are high. This is a dungeon that has a lot of problems, but also has a lot of really, really cool stuff to it. I think the pulls in the beginning are awesome. I think the bosses are awesome, at least some of them. I think that's pulling through the walls is terrible. I think the weird Z-axis stuff and some of the mandatory skips was terrible. Cannons were kind of whatever. They went through some annoying phases, but I think towards the end of the expansion, they sort of ended up like around where Plague Borers were, where it was like not too impactful, but it was still like you could use them. I'd probably put it around where I would put Plaguefall, like near bottom of B.
So I think cannons were actually the biggest issue by far. Like obviously the Z-axis thing, but I feel like that's just more of like a, I don't know. I feel like we should be able to fix that. If not, the cannons are by far the biggest issue. I think no matter where we put this, it has to be higher than Necrotic Wake. I think it's just a better Necrotic Wake.
Yeah,
The
I
bosses
agree.
are better, the pulls are better. It still does the same shit. Like instead of cannoning, you use orbs and spears and shit. But I think it's just a better Necrotic Wake.
Okay, so somewhere between Plaguefall and Necrotic Wake, where would you put it, Zyro?
Man, I think you guys are being so generous.
Oh, okay. Zyro's coming in with the
Okay.
people's take. Let's hear it.
Dude, the fact that you had to like limit your nameplate distance so you couldn't target things on the floor below or above you in this dungeon, like
Wait, what?
dude,
That wasn't a thing. I don't think that was a thing.
it was a thing. It was so bad,
Oh.
man. Like, the only redeeming quality in this dungeon was, like Grell said, the first pull. Loved doing that on Frostmage. Was fun as hell. First boss was
First
good.
boss too.
Yeah, first boss is good. I think like that's it. Like that's it. I don't know. Like
I don't know. I mean, I just see it as a better Necrotic Wake. Like, I think either we put Necrotic Wake further down, or like I'm also down to put Necrotic Wake and Total Gore lower.
I think I might have like
I think it's just the better version of Necrotic Wake.
I must have erased all Mythic Plus runs pre-awakening from my mind. The cannons were infinite shots at one point, right?
Yeah.
So the way they
And that-
worked,
well, that
so the way they worked was at the start of the expansion, they were infinite shots and they also scaled with key level. And so people would go wild with the cannons where you would just pull tons of stuff into the cannons, like everything in the whole area, you would just skip everything. Then they nerfed the cannons so that they didn't scale with key level and they only did M0 damage and they were basically useless. And then everyone got giga maj. And then in the end, they made it so the cannons scaled again, but they only had 5 shots. And then once they had 5 shots, then it was like, okay, this is then it was just like the Plague Borers in Plaguefall, where like, okay, it definitely cheeses parts of the dungeon and helps if you're a coordinated
was
group,
a
but it doesn't like
lot,
make or break.
you were literally cannoning like 20 to 50% or some shit. I don't know, maybe not 50%, but like
Well,
into like 30%.
if you were in like a super high, like, you know, if you were going giga hard and like pulling everything and like being super coordinated, but I would argue that probably most people would just cannon the outside stuff and like maybe some stuff from the inside.
Yep.
Also,
I'm pretty
the fact
okay
that,
with B or C.
dude, this dungeon, the way that Affix has interacted with this dungeon, like, man, it was so bad. Like, Z-axis sanguine healing sometimes just fucked you.
Remember when a mob would fall through the floor?
Dude.
And
And you lost your entire run.
this is look. Here's where I'm gonna put it. I'll let you guys move it if you want to. I'm gonna put it in high C, right below Temple. I feel like it's just like Temple in the sense that it has some pretty big downsides, but it does have some redeeming qualities in it, which make me like, I would like to run this dungeon maybe again sometime, but probably not more than one season.
Okay,
I agree.
I think that's fair.
All right. Back finally after a long BFA adventure, we're back to Theater of Pain. This is a dungeon that I thought I liked for a while, but the more I play this dungeon, the more it's kind of like,
The replay value is very low.
yeah. All right, I'll put up a poll.
You
What
just
do
do
you
the
think
same-
about Theater?
You just do the same pulls, except they just get harder. Like, that's literally all there is to it. It feels like you just fight the same shit all the time. The mini boss RNG was awful. The bosses were okay. Like, first boss was kind of interesting. Cool Frog was a healing boss. Gore Chop was like okay. Last boss was okay. Zav was pretty dog shit, but
Yeah.
that's about like it.
I remember we disagreed on this one a lot last week.
What did you say? I forgot.
I liked it. I didn't think it was A tier, but I liked it. Like,
What did I put it? I think I put it C, right?
I think you had it C. I think the fact that the 3 different wings are actually like different designed is kind of nice. Like, yeah, replayability is going to be pretty low in the future, but we don't have to worry about that for 2 more years, right? Like, the bosses are fine except for Zav.
The mini bosses are probably the worst part.
It's a raider dungeon.
Yeah, the whole Zav wing is the bad wing, right? Like, the fact that mini bosses are RNG and you like getting the wrong one fucks you sometimes. The fact that they decided to add some cool PvP minigame in that nobody actually like participates in except for I'm Fired Up and Shakib. Like, it's the whole Zav wing is probably the worst part of this dungeon and probably makes this like B at tops for me.
I'm still leaning towards C, like maybe like a high C.
So the one thing I like about this dungeon, this is like healer take, is that a lot of the trash does a lot of damage. Like every single pull in theater to me feels engaging. Like think about a route, right?
What the hell? I thought healers hate that.
You go down from the first boss. Let's say you go to Kultharok, right? The ghosts, like pretty crazy pulls if you do 1 or 2 pulls. Then the storm guy, he can be pretty tough. Then the storm guy with the extra mobs. Then you get like a little bit of a break. Then you have like the Kultharok stuff in the pack before Kultharok. That can be hard. Like then whatever wing you go into, like the Zav wing, the first couple pulls are pretty tough. Like all of the Zav wing is tough to heal. All of the Gore Chop wing, you actually have like stuff to stop and dispels and stuff. Like it's a very, very engaging dungeon for a healer. Similar in ways to Waycrest. I think Waycrest is just strictly better, though, in a lot of those ways. I think the boss design is better. I think there's, like, more routing options. I think it's kind of just like a shittier Waycrest to me, in a way. So, I don't know. Like, it's fun to heal. Me, personally, like, it's more fun to heal than a lot of the other dungeons, but the replay value is definitely not very high, and, like, I don't know. It's definitely a fun healer dungeon.
What do healers in chat think?
Quick tangent.
All right, healer vote real quick. Only healers can vote. Type your vote in the chat right now. What do you think about it?
Is what that guy said in chat true? Can you manipulate the mini boss spawns?
No, that's bullshit.
He said that whichever one melee is last.
Yeah. I mean,
that's bullshit, right?
We're actually the ones who came up with that.
Yeah, so
really?
We
every
gaslit
high
everyone.
tier has been every high tier has memed about that for the entire expansion because none of us actually know if it's true or not, but it's not true.
Yeah, I figured it's just RNG.
JPC spent like 8 hours alone on Tournament Realm one time trying to figure it out, and he couldn't do it because we were saying that it was manipulatable or whatever.
Well, here's the reason I was like confused when I saw that is because I'm pretty sure we set the Tournament Realm to have a particular set of mini boss spawns every time. So I'm like, that shouldn't be deterministic. I'm pretty sure.
You guys have a bug on that, by the way, where if it spawns the wrong one that wasn't supposed to spawn, it doesn't spawn the encrypted affix in the first room.
Huh.
Anyway, it's kind of random, but all right. So I don't know. To me, like, it's hard because, like, objectively, I can say that Freehold is an S tier dungeon for everybody, but personally, like, Freehold wasn't super fun to heal. Like, theater is pretty fun to heal, but I don't know. To me, it's like somewhere in between DOS and Plaguefall. That's kind of where I put it in my mind.
Agreed.
It's probably more fun to heal than Plaguefall, honestly, but I wouldn't say that it's a better dungeon.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I think the biggest thing that's keeping me back from putting it high is it's not a very flexible dungeon. Not only is it not flexible, it just feels like some of the parts are so bullshit. Like, slow touches are bullshit. The jumps randomly one-shotting is bullshit. The mini-bosses are bullshit. I'm trying to think of what else is bullshit. The gas bags are bullshit.
All right, what if I put it? What if I put it
I definitely
at
feel
top
like
of
it's,
C tier?
yeah, like I definitely prefer it over a lot of these dungeons. That's for sure. Like I
Mhm.
prefer it over Theater of Pain or
Over
Temple.
Theater of Pain. What? All right, Zyro picks top of
Oh.
C tier or bottom of B tier.
Oh, see.
C. Okay, that's what the chat picked too. I
What
think
the hell? This guy's calling me a negative ass when everyone is trying to tell me that everything is D. I swear to God, every time I put something in A or B, everyone's like, "No, it's a
Man.
D," and this guy's calling me negative.
Dorki just got one guide.
I hate one guys, man.
Yup.
Why are they so stupid? All right, go on.
All right. Well, we talked a lot about theater. This is a dungeon that I miss a lot. Actually, it had some very interesting and unique mechanics in it that I don't know. I don't know if it doesn't seem very modern, but I personally enjoyed it. Was the Underrot. The Underrot was a dungeon that was like linear, but at the same time, it did feel like there was.
I was just
know.
about to say that too. I think Underrun is the ultimate linear, but you can choose how you want to play the dungeon.
But can you really though? Because think about how many mobs were closed. There were the matrons in the beginning.
What do you mean by being able
masks.
to choose what you pull? Is like, you know, how big you pull in the second boss room, for example, and like, you know, how you chain, like which combination of mobs you pull.
You're pulling.
Like, there's a lot of flexibility. It's not like, oh, okay, you have to fight these specific 3, and then these specific 3, and then these specific 3. It's like, you know, all right, you know, maybe your group is good. You can pull like 3 slimes plus 3 casters plus 1 maggot plus 1 the chargy dudes, the swarmers. So like there was a lot of flexibility in how you played. And I think all the bosses were really fair except for the beginning of the expansion first boss.
Yeah, the beginning of the expansion first boss. Another thing I'll say is like, I don't know, the more I think about Underrot, the more I think that it takes a lot of the like tropes of things that could be negative and does them in the right way. So like the first one is it's linear, but at the same time, like you still, because the mobs are like, you know, not necessarily that crazy in terms of kicks or whatever, like you can choose how big you're pulling as you're going along, right? And then also it's like an underground dungeon, and you would think like when you were talking about like underground, like low ceiling dungeons, you have like, oh, terrible camera or whatever, but the ceiling is really high, like the rooms are really open. So like hearing a linear underground dungeon, you're like, oh no, this is gonna be fucking Oldemon, right? This is shit. Like Underrot is all of the things that potentially could be wrong, but they're just done right. And I think I don't know, I like this dungeon a lot. It had some weird stuff in it. Like the blood swarmers were particularly nasty. I think, well, talking about the end of the expansion, I think the boss tuning was good, but there were definitely phases where the boss tuning was really rough. But yeah, I don't know. I liked Underrot. I have lots of good things to say about Underrot. I think it's again, it's one of those dungeons where it's like, okay, we want to put a dungeon that's linear and that, you know, has this whole aesthetic. Like this is it done right, and this could fit in with dungeons like Freehold, and both of them are super, super enjoyable.
That's actually a good take. Underride is like SD.
Similar, yeah, similar. I think what makes SD
like
stand out is that the urns. I think the urns are like, there's not very many dungeons. Like a lot of the dungeons in here are fun, but like the urns were literally like an innovation in dungeons that is no other dungeon has. That's really, really cool, which is why I hold it so highly.
I think Underrun is like a staple of how dungeons should be designed. Like they could expand on how it works. Some could be harder than Underrun, some could be easier than Underrun. Just make it similar design. Like Underrun is one of those dungeons where you could W key the entire way and you'll get 100% count in the end. But you could also just play a higher key route where you want to like skip the least efficient packs and then like, you know, pull in the more count heavy ones. I think this is like better than Halls.
I think it was a good dungeon.
Xaro didn't like it.
No, I think it is a good dungeon. I mean, I could do more damage than the other DPS in my group with only being alive on the bosses for 25% of the time, so I vibe with it.
Hell yeah.
No, I think, I mean, the highlight of the dungeon obviously is the second boss room, right? Everything in that second boss room was like great. The fact that you were just chain pulling, there were still mechanics that you had to deal with. Boss design was like, I don't know. It was decent. Like last boss was good, I think, even though it was a little weird.
I like second boss.
Second boss was good too. Third boss was kind of whatever. First boss was definitely not great, but I mean, when we were talking about this the other day, I think one of the biggest problems with this dungeon was the fact that there was unavoidable damage, like the Shrine Maidens at the start. That was not great.
Yeah, the whole starting area was nasty. Those ticks that would explode, the spear throwing guys that if you just got chosen, because it was a pack of 3 of them, right? So like if you just got chosen by 2 or 3 of them, you would just instantaneously die. Like the whole beginning area was so nasty, and I feel like a lot of people who didn't like Underrot probably didn't like it for the fact that in the beginning area it was so tough for pugs, but once you got through that and the dungeon opened up, it would become like very, very fun and interesting, a lot more chill. I think I want to put it in the A tier. I want to put it like
fine.
I want to put it like
Halls
somewhere in the
sure.
middle of the A tier, above Halls for sure.
Low
I
middle.
feel like I enjoyed it more than Atal'Dazar, but less than Motherload. What do you think?
Underrot better than Atal'Dazar? That's close.
I personally prefer Atal over these other 2 dungeons actually, but I don't know.
I think that's a judgment call. Whatever you think.
Okay.
It's
I mean,
really
either
loose.
way, it's hard to rank
we can
inner
let chat
tier.
vote this one. Yeah, it doesn't
All
really
right.
matter too much.
Well, I don't know. I think chat's pretty split. I mean, if you ask chat, they're just gonna say put Sanguine Depths in D tier. I think either way, like these are all good dungeons, and we have like sort of a pattern. These are 3 BFA dungeons and a BFA dungeon in S tier.
Dude, that's what I'm saying. BFA dungeons are just full of high A tiers.
All right. The next dungeon, another dungeon that I did on time walking, but I don't have any high key pushing experience, so you guys are gonna have to fill in. Vault of the Wardens.
Okay. I actually thought that Vault was a very solid dungeon. I think this is going to be divisive. I think there are going to be a lot of people that think it's high, very high, or very low. The boss so it was a 5 boss dungeon. The boss design was actually pretty solid. Last boss was really, really cool, especially in the early phases. They kind of dumbed it down a little bit because it was too difficult for people to do. But the fact that you had this whole lantern mechanic where you had to, your healer held the lantern and walked around the room to try to find where the ads were, and so you could dodge the walls. Really cool concept for a final boss. I think it was a really well executed boss too. I think for me, the highlight's probably got to be boss design here. Like, it's just a really good dungeon, really solid dungeon in general. Like, this is probably one of the few Legion dungeons that I'm really comfortable saying is just a very solid A tier dungeon. There's really not a lot to say is bad in this dungeon. I think
there's nothing really negative with this dungeon.
The only thing that's weird is having to wait for elevator RP sometimes, which people just counteracted by using avalanche potions. And then there was like this really weird bug that had like a percentage chance to happen similar to the orbs in Sethraliss, where sometimes the glazer mirrors would not point the right direction and you actually just couldn't kill the boss, but that happened like less than 1% of the time. I think it's just a really solid dungeon. I think it's an A tier dungeon.
I don't feel anything particularly strong about this dungeon. Like, I don't know. I'm thinking about it. First boss is very whatever. Ash Golem was very whatever. What was the third boss? Third boss was
the Inquisitor guy in the middle.
Oh yeah, the eyeball. Yeah. I like that boss. That guy was kind of cool. Last boss also just felt kind of whatever to me. I don't know. I feel like it's a very high B at the very minimum, just because it doesn't really have any flaws in particular that stand out. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know if I can put it on the same tier as some of these dungeons. I guess I can see it above Court of Stars actually. So I don't mind Vault.
I feel like from my limited experience as a Vault of the Warden casual, the boss design feels cool. Like the pulls are fine. It seems a little long. It's a 5 boss dungeon that has like an elevator and like, I don't know, to me, and then you're like going through the whole spider area and it's all dark. Like, I think there's no way I could see it being high A or S. To me, it feels... I didn't do it on high keys, but it feels kind of mid for me. Like, somewhere around, like, Seat Miss Shrine level. But the chat voted A. Zyro says A. A lot of people do like this dungeon. To me, it feels probably wouldn't be my favorite dungeon to heal. But
the thing is, I'm looking at B, and B has, like, I feel like everything with B sort of had some issue.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas A is like, it's good enough. I would have it.
Do you think like low A, around where court is, maybe?
Yeah, at the very best, it would be low A. I can't see it being above Hall.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, okay, somewhere around here. Okay, we actually have... Well, we'll do Tazavesh after this, because I have to add him in. The last BFA dungeon. So that was the last Legion dungeon. The last BFA dungeon, Waycrest Manor. I feel like this is going to be a polarizing one as well. I think by far the most annoying thing about... The two most annoying things about this dungeon were the very narrow corridors and like difficulty with some affixes that had those, and also the RNG of the doors. The fact that if you got the door where you could just go straight to the Sisters and Lust at the beginning, it felt really, really good. But if you had like top right and you had to do like the big loop-de-doop, where like people would literally take the seasonal affix and just run for a full straight minute because the top right route was literally just 1 minute worse than going left, which is like not the end of the world.
RNG witch spawn too. You would sometimes
the witch
spawns. Playing forward to witch. Remember playing forward to witches?
I do remember
you
that.
You just get
actually.
that one witch that would just fuck your entire team up.
Oh my god, the one that
or
would
other
like,
times you would one would just like do like a big tank buster attack for no reason, versus like the one that just does literally nothing.
Yeah, so this dungeon to me, like I was talking about theater, I feel like this is just like a strictly better theater in terms of like it's not like it has different paths at the start, but the paths interconnect a lot more. The bosses seem just better. The trash seems just better. Like the pulls are bigger. The RNG is definitely the downside, and I feel like it has too many downsides for me to put it in S. But at least for me personally, I loved healing this dungeon, and I would want to put it like in high A for sure.
I think me and Zara talked about this. We said something about if they made door RNG good and like the witch spawn good, this would easily be an S.
Like why not just start the dungeon and all three of the doors are open? Like why not? Why is that a bad thing? Like I get that they're trying to make people go different ways, but stop making us do things.
Yeah. I would have to put this at an A at very best. Like I don't think it's an S. I wish it was an S, but
right?
Yeah. High A for sure. It's a fun dungeon. Like trash pulls are fun. There's like something for everyone. I think all the bosses except for the pig boss were fun. Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot of negatives to say about this dungeon. It's really just the RNG doors and the RNG witch.
I think Tree Boss was very, very unique. I feel like they struggle a lot of times with making bosses that are like cool for tanks. Like I feel like either the boss is Resident Sleeper for tank or like it just hurts really bad and it's like very stressful and you're just at risk of getting one shot. But like the way that the tree boss works where it just constantly builds up damage and like you can tank it longer and longer, I feel like was like a very cool mechanic that they did. And like you have the choice of like when to clear and when to not. I feel like witches for lower keys was pretty wild. Like for a higher key, it was like this was definitely an engaging, cool boss, but for lower keys, it was wild. Like I definitely understand. Like I don't know. It definitely to me is not. It definitely isn't. It definitely isn't S tier. Like it's definitely not as accessible. But I mean, to me, it's like sort of similar to Sanguine Depths in a way where it's like really challenging to heal. It has some narrow corridors and it has like really, really big challenges. But I think the pulls that you can do and like the bosses and the mechanics in the dungeon like just make up for it. And I don't know. Yeah, I would probably I feel like you guys maybe rate Atal'Dazar a little higher than me, so I would put it again in that same spot between Motherload and Atal'Dazar probably.
I would be fine with that too, honestly. Like I enjoy them all equally as much.
Well, Lots of BFA dungeons. We're missing 2. We're gonna need to go to paint
Yeah,
here.
it has issues.
We're gonna need to go to paint here.
Holy shit.
Oh, flashbang. Alright, I have to hold on. You just have to watch on my stream.
Yeah, that's fine.
You just have to watch on my stream. So one of you guys is gonna have to we'll start talking about streets. Let me try and find an image
Can you zoom in? Just crop your OBS to like only show. Okay, whatever, sure.
This is what we got to work with. Oh, never mind. Bottom right, bottom right. Dude, it literally doesn't let me change. Like, the only option is 100 and 200. It doesn't let me change.
Dude, who cares? Just
this is the closest we're gonna get. I don't know. You guys talk. What do you guys think about Streets? We've only got to play it for 1 season, so it's a little bit hard. Dog shit.
Yeah. So let's see. Almost all the bosses are terrible. The only good boss is Mayo boss and the last boss. First boss is like awful. The Oasis is literally nothing. What even is that? Menagerie was very mediocre. What the fuck happened to my... Holy shit. The trash was all just like whatever. The RP makes things really bad. Like, I think RP is by far the worst thing in that dungeon. I do think it has some redeeming qualities, though. Like, amongst the small redeeming qualities would be flexibility in how you can pull trash. Me and Zara actually talked about this before. This is the only dungeon where pulling one mob by itself is actually okay. It's acceptable. Yeah, like, think about it for a second.
Yeah.
We could skip the last mini boss if we wanted to, but we actually pull it for count. And if you're pugging, you probably go left and you fight that one dude by himself, and then you fight the 2 dogs with the 1 dinosaur. And that never happens. I think having the choice of going left or right is actually pretty good. Like, this is one of the few situations where you're actually fine with either side.
So I think with Streets, I agree with you that the boss fights are really dog water. Especially the music boss. I think is the whole music area, like having to do that RP and doing the music boss. I get that it's fun in Mythic 0, but that should all just be deleted from Mythic Plus. Like, get rid of the music boss, get rid of the whole RP. I actually went full circle on this dungeon because when this dungeon first came out, I was kind of into it. I'm just like, yeah, you know, decent sized pulls, like it's pretty wide open. There's some different routing options, but like the bosses are just so uninteresting, and there's just so much RP and like walking around, and like it just feels like, I don't know, like thinking, like imagining in the next expansion, like, will I miss this dungeon and will I want this dungeon to come back? Like, honestly, even maybe I'm biased here, the fact that we're still going to keep playing it for a while, but like, honestly, a lot of these dungeons in C tier have more redeeming qualities than Streets do. Like, I would rather play Toldagor than Streets. Like, Toldagor has more redeeming qualities than Streets.
It's probably
like I would rather play. Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with that.
Wait, you guys really hate Streets that much?
All right, Zaro, preach the good word of Streets. Preach the good word of Streets. Take it out of the low C tier, or do your best to.
Where did we put this the other day, Dorki? I don't remember. Do you have that?
I have no idea too. Hold on, let me see if I pull it up. I thought I put it in C too, but I maybe even B. I don't know.
So I think the biggest glaring issue with Streets right now is that pretty much on Tyrannical, everything hinges behind you living through Mailroom, right? And on Fortified, a 5-boss dungeon with the trash density this dungeon has is just a really kind of difficult timer to live through. But the fact of the matter is, you pull most of the time one half of the dungeon. I think one of the things that I liked positively about this dungeon is that it's a rare, like a very rare dungeon in Shadowlands where you can choose different routes and not be wrong, right? Like, there are players that will go left for trash count and there are players that will go right for trash count, and neither of them is technically the wrong way to go. You can do both and you'll still be able to time the key if you play properly.
Yep.
I don't see this being a C. Like, I think it's a B for me.
Here's the problem, right? Is the way, at least I'm thinking about it, is like, the way I see it is like, S tier is like lots of good stuff, not much bad stuff. A tier is like mostly good stuff, but some downsides. B tier is like mid, like, you know, they sort of balance out. C is like the downsides are starting to win. With streets, like, the upsides are, I guess, that you have lots of routing options. Like, I think that's by far the strength in streets. But I feel like past that, there's just not really that many upsides. Like, the trash to me just feels so boring. The bosses just feel boring. Like, and then if you look at the downsides, like, there's
RP and shit.
Literally the most. What other dungeon has more RP than streets does? And yeah, it is sort of true that you can route around it, so I'm going to give it some points there. But at the same time, like, there's still RP that you have to do, and like people having to go away or whatever. I think, I don't know. Yeah, I'm trying to put it in the C tier. I'm trying to put it in the C tier. I have it like somewhere between DOS and King's Rest. What do you guys think?
Oh, here was another issue too. Because of the RP, you're basically routing around RP the entire time. So even though there's like choice, there's not entirely choice because you always want to try to do stuff during RP. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you just always play this dungeon basically the same. The only thing you really choose is if you want to go left or right.
Yeah, and well, keep in mind too, everyone's talking about this, which I think is like sort of true. I feel like this dungeon's gonna feel a lot worse without woe.
Yeah.
Because, like, okay, imagine this, right? Like, this is basically how you play this dungeon is you kill the first boss, then you do the pack after the first boss and you get the woe, and then you can kind of get all that RP out of the way. But imagine not having a woe there, and then what do? Like, what route would you do? Like, okay, you go right and you pull that stuff, but then you don't even have any of the RP started. So then you have to like run ahead and start the RP, then do another pull after that while you're like doing that RP, and then you do another pull after that while you're doing the RP, and it's just like, that's gonna be, I don't know. I want to put, I don't know, what do you guys think? I want to put it somewhere between DOS and KR, like in this area. God, I can't believe I'm putting it near King's Rest. After I had high hopes for this dungeon. Yeah,
I feel like King's Rest, dude. I feel like putting it that low is like, oh man.
I can see why Zyro says that.
Do you think it's better than Necrotic Wake, Zyro?
Oh yeah, easily.
Okay.
The dungeon is actually well designed. It's just all the stuff that makes it bad. Like the RP, yeah, the RP, the not fun, the bosses, the trash. Like nothing really stands out.
Yeah, the RP is definitely like a big killer in the dungeon.
Blizzard likes RP, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's bad.
All right, well, I'm gonna put it right here unless anyone has objections between DOS and Wake. It's locked in. It's MS Paint. I can't edit it anymore. Okay, the very last dungeon. Not even gonna try and find a good image for this. Gambino. I actually was pleasantly surprised about this dungeon. I feel like the dungeon length is good. It's linear, but at the same time, you have lots of options for what you want to pull. The pulls are big. The bosses are you know, but there's a variety of bosses. Like the last boss is a healer boss. The second boss is a tank boss. The first boss feels like a DPS boss with like, you know, the main killers are the ads and the beam or whatever. So I do like the variety. Like I can't expect every boss to be a banger healer boss or whatever. I don't know. I really, really like Gambit. The only thing that I'll say is I feel like the fish sticks are a little bit abusive. And if you have like a good team, then it's not super bad. But I can see the beginning part being a little bit overwhelming for like pugs. But I don't know. I think Gambit's kind of a banger.
I remember exactly what I said when we did Shadowland Dungeons.
Yeah, I remember this
A few days ago. I said this is the absolute closest dungeon that Shadowlands has to an S tier dungeon, but I don't think it's S tier. I think it's the very top of A tier. I think things like the last boss of this dungeon just kind of dragging on for too long without really anything changing on it are the kind of things that make this dungeon like really not an S tier dungeon. Like that boss lasts so long and it doesn't do anything, man.
Yep. First boss is also kind of boring.
Yeah. You think it's better than Sanguine Depths? That's the big question.
I think objectively, yeah. I find Sanguine Depths more fun, personally, but I think Gambit is better designed. I'd rather more dungeons be designed like Gambit.
Yeah, I agree with that. As a
but
healer,
personally, I enjoy Sanguine Depths more.
As a healer and a high key doer, I definitely enjoy Sanguine Depths more, but I can also understand why like people would like Gambino too. And I think overall as a dungeon design, I can see the appeal of Gambino. The winner of the poll by 49% is S tier. And then
that's pretty close.
90% of people say it should be A tier or higher. So we put it, what about versus Maw of Souls? If we think it's better than Sanguine, is it better than Maw of Souls?
The thing about Maw of Souls is because it's such a short dungeon, I feel like it's kind of hard to beat Maw of Souls. Because, I mean, again, we're ranking this by replayability, right? Like, I feel like Maw just, like, I would play Maw any day because, you know, it's a nice chill key. I would have no issues playing Maw. But,
it's funny, I think Gambit's kind of like an upgraded Maw that just falls a little bit short of Maw because, like, it's a little bit too long. Like it's it's the same thing. It's a 3-boss dungeon. It has like very, very similar trash density, I guess, with it moved around a little bit. Like the Murloc pulls are very similar to like the big pulls that you do on the boat before the 3rd boss. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's slightly worse than Maw, but we're like picking it.
Yeah, we're nitpicking. We get
they both have their advantages.
That we get the general area, right?
Yeah. Oh, we're doing a count?
Okay, let's do a count real quick.
I like this.
So 1, 2, 3 A-tier dungeons in Shadowlands. I feel like it's a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. And I'm interested to hear like your guys' final thoughts on the tier list because it's a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. 1, 2, 3,
here's
4.
how I feel about it. I don't like Halls as much as it's rated. I mean, I think Halls deserves that rating, but personally, I feel like Halls is a B or C for me. I don't really care too much about playing Halls. Court of Stars, I also don't really care about playing, but I can see why it's very good. Vault, I also don't really care about playing. I think the dungeons I would want to play the most here are Motherload, Waycrest, Underrod, Maw, Sanguine Depths. Those are like fun dungeons for me. Freehold, I would love to have again. Mist, I feel like it's too high for me too, but like I can see why it's there. It's just like nice show key. Karazhans are also like pretty okay. Seed, I have no idea what to expect about Seed. I want to try at least Seed once or twice in the current state of the game. Like I swear Seed is pretty underrated. I think it's better than people give it credit for. Shrine is like, only we like that. Nobody likes Shrine. Mechagons, people like it, but I don't think it's that good. Yeah, everything else is like pretty okay.
I think I agree with a lot of your things. Like, I think halls and myths are up higher because of like the design aspects and because
Yeah,
people
they're
like
just
them.
well
But
designed.
personally, I don't like. I don't really mind myths. I don't really mind myths. I don't really mind halls. Like, I don't know. I think they're maybe I would knock them down slightly. Like now, the way I feel, oh, I would love to play like Waycrest and Natal and under way more halls. But I think if we go another 2 years in the future, I like looking back and like trying to do nice chill halls or myths, I could see that for sure.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised by how close it is too. I mean, just from a replayability like perspective, I think it's
Mhm.
kind of surprising how close a lot of the expansions are. I would have
Yeah.
expected with talking to you two that BFA dungeons would be rated a lot higher than they currently are, but it seems like we've done a
It seems very, very close with like a slight edge. But the one thing I'll say is like the slight edge is also on top of the fact that there were more dungeons in BFA and Legion that there were in Shadowlands. So
Sure.
like there's 3 A tier dungeons in like A and better, there's 3 A tier 3 in Shadowlands. There's 5 A tier or better dungeons in BFA. And when the dungeon pool in Shadowlands is only 10 dungeons, like 2 more good dungeons in the pool I think is maybe bigger than most people would make it out to be. But yeah, I'm also more surprised about how I rank them, or how they were ranked rather. Let me see things that I would disagree with. Personally, there are dungeons that are fun to heal and fun for me that I don't even like. For instance, Sanguine. I personally have more fun in both Sanguine and Waycrest than I have in Freehold. That doesn't mean I would consider them better dungeons. Probably even I think Gambit and Freehold and Motherload are all sort of around the same. I didn't personally find Atal'Dazar that great. I like Underrot. Halls is kind of whatever. I personally don't think Court of Stars is that fun either. I think Vault of the Wardens does not seem like it's that fun. I'm surprised that everyone says it's A tier. I feel like it's a long, boring, like shit ass dungeon that's like low B tier at best. But I also didn't push high keys with it. Same with Karazhan. I think lower Karazhan seems like total dog water. It's like tons of narrow corridors, like all this like really stupid trash, like some bullshit bosses. Like the first boss is like some weird theater that changes every single time. Like to me, I don't think lower Kara seems that fun. Upper Kara also like maybe mid B at best. Like I would much rather play Shrine than Upper Kara because it's super super linear and there's like no good trash pulls. I don't think Junkyard. It was okay as a healer, but I'm surprised that it ended up this high. I liked Azshara. I think Azshara was cool. I thought Temple was fun to heal and Theater were fun to heal and Toldagor was fun to heal, and those would probably go higher for me, but I don't think they're necessarily like that great of dungeons. And yeah, the rest seem fine. There's a lot of Legion dungeons that I didn't play, but that's like a healer take.
Yeah, for me, I would like to play everything in S and A aside from Vault and Court of Stars. B. I don't know what I want to play in B. I actually don't really care about the B dungeons.
Yeah, well, B's a dungeon where, like, in 2 years, if it comes back on the
Yeah, B was
rotation,
like
you'll be
okay.
like,
Yeah, I was like,
yeah,
it was
B will
okay,
be
it
like,
was
oh, this
whatever.
is cool. Like, you don't mind seeing that dungeon at all. Like, same sort of with C tier, but like, you don't want to see a lot of C tier
Well,
dungeons.
C,
like,
it's like I don't
Yeah.
really want to see these dungeons. And then D is like just erase them from the game.
yeah. It's really hard to say that I want to go back and play the Legion dungeons because the game is just so much different now, right? Like you don't play the game the same.
Like a
as
lot
you
of these
did
are
back then.
unplayable. Like Nelthslayer, I'm surprised people even want to consider Nelthslayer any higher. Nelthslayer is fucking unplayable, man.
dude,
I don't
everybody
wanna touch
loves
that shit.
Nelth's Lair and Darkheart Thicket. Everyone.
I don't
loved
get
those
how
two
they like
dungeons.
those dungeons. I mean, it's cool. Like, sure, I'd have fun doing them in a +5 and stuff, but like, if I have to go beyond a 15, no thanks, man. I don't want to play those dungeons. Yeah, they were fucking miserable. Like anything in C and below, I don't really want to see those dungeons. Hell, like even Azshara was not that fun in TGP. And like Cathedral, I feel like it would probably have some massive issues.
Trying to think off the top of my head if Cathedral was really that bad. I think the only pull that you'd really have a problem with nowadays is probably the first pull, where you pulled like 7 mobs on top of the mini boss and your healer fucked off and did the skip thing.
What did those mobs even do? All I know is that there's that one guy who does a frontal, the Dreadlord.
The Dreadlord does a frontal, yeah. I think there's an
don't
interrupt
know what
on him as
everyone else
well. There were some things, dude. It's been 6 years, I think. There were some stuns that we had to do as well. Man, it's been so long. I think that would be pretty difficult to do without a healer nowadays, though.
Yeah. Yo, what is the hottest take in chat?
Nubidin saying that King's Rest should be a B tier dungeon.
Oh, that's a hot one. All right, someone says EOA is fucking S. Does anyone agree? Any S tier EOA enjoyers? I have Azshara. Is that just the one guy? Ooh, this guy says Shrine is high A. I like that guy. That's a hot take. Yeah. Someone says KR is A tier. How do you guys feel about that?
Yo, can I get mod really quick?
I'm not sure. I feel like the thing is, the healers struggle when they're plugging, right?
The healers that are only a DPS that just want to do the most damage and that's it, and they don't like those dungeons. But I feel like actually people who like healing and want to move up and are like trying hard, I feel like healers enjoy the dungeons that are hard to heal.
Dude, that's a dime a dozen.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, like I don't think healers really enjoy Sanguine Depths or what else? Like Toldagor. I think they hate Toldagor. Temple should be A tier. Holy,
Yeah, see, here comes the healers. Okay, now there's some healers coming out that are hating Sanguine. Yeah, they weren't happy that people liked it.
Man, all these healers, dude. Just go to the carnival and play some whack-a-mole. It's the same shit.
Play the red bar game. That's what we used to call it.
That's the one.
Is there any more hot takes? All the hot takes left.
It was a good discussion, though. I feel like... well, okay, so hold on. So let's now look at the tier list real quick and talk about what, like, the summaries of what make a good dungeon. So I think what I'm seeing are, at least from me personally, some route maneuverability, but it doesn't have to be a lot, right? Like Gambit, Maw of Souls, like Sanguine, it doesn't have a lot of route, but it needs to have at least some replayability. I think fun boss fights, I think short, although there are some longer dungeons that are creeping up in here, but if you looked at the timers, I think generally as you go up, the timers get less and less. What do you guys think? Is there any like things that we can see that are high up and not low that they should be?
Wait, so what are the long ones up there? So Sanguine Depths is like the only long one I can see.
Sanguine Depths. I don't think Motherload was that
lower
short.
Kara is kind of up there.
Waycrest Manor was also a 5
but lower Kara wasn't
right?
real. Waycrest was only like 36 minutes or some shit. Is it 39? I don't even know.
I thought
It
it
was
was a
not
little
40
more,
though.
but maybe not. Yeah, it wasn't a long dungeon, but it wasn't like a 30-minute dungeon though. I think
Motherload
Motherload and Waycrest were both like high 30s.
Dude, Motherload didn't feel long though. I don't know why.
Yeah, because it's a good dungeon. The bosses are fun. You're blasting
Yeah,
trash.
I just enjoyed it the entire time. Lower Kara was a long timer, but it wasn't like real. Like you didn't need that much time.
Yeah, the timer was just dumb.
It was like Court of Stars, sort of. Court of Stars is actually like a 20-minute dungeon.
I feel like Vault was pretty long. No, it was. No, it was
Yeah.
30,
Vault's kinda
32.
No, that
33,
was definitely not
33.
32.
It was 33.
33?
I'm pretty sure.
There's no shot.
Wait,
Hold on. Let me look this
what
up.
I think it was
I'm
36,
I'm pretty sure
right?
Vault was.
It might have been 36.
Vault was. Yeah, Vault was in the higher.
Oh, Nubidin
30s.
says Vault 33.
Really?
I'm looking.
Like at the end of the expansion or what?
Yeah, 30. Hold on.
I'm gonna look for a world first key or some shit.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at YouTube videos. Yeah. No, 33.
Oh, my YouTube is lagging.
Yeah,
Oh,
33.
really, dude? I didn't feel like it. I swear that dungeon felt so long.
Yeah, 33 for a five boss dungeon is pretty tough. I mean, there wasn't that much trash, to be honest.
Yeah.
What do you think about this take? You're overrating some BFA dungeons because they got heavily lifted up by Awakened.
I feel like we already put them all really low. Like Total Gore was heavily affected. We already put it low. Temple was heavily affected. We'd already put it low.
Yeah.
Let's
King's
see what
Rest
else.
also was really nice with Awakened.
Yeah.
With the bridge.
The Junkyard stuff was like whatever. Shrine, yeah, but I mean we already put it sort of low.
I mean, Shrine I don't even think was that much. Like, I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with the fact that we actually talked about it a little bit ago, but BFA definitely had more mandatory, like, well, let's call it like advanced skips, like any skip other than you can just walk by the mobs. But I would prefer that rather than the dungeons like Theater or Spires where you just have to walk in a straight line and you just have to pull every single mob. And yeah, there's no mandatory skips in Theater, but at the same time, then you have to pull every single mob that you run into going straight.
Yeah, Theater of Pain, you're just doing the same shit over and over. It's just harder every time. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't feel like... Because, like, if you look at Underrod or Atal or Motherload, I guess Motherload was affected by Awakened.
Well, so
even
Motherload, I'm going to say specifically that it was affected by Season 4 because the tuning of the last area and the Awakened. But even, like, okay, even with just the tuning, which I think is fair, like, if you can, as long as you can pull the 4th area, then that's fine, right? Like, having to skip the whole 3rd area was a little bit messy, but at the same time, like,